Ir šiandien vėl bus angliškas, anglų kalba visas podcastas su mano geru draugu Dan Prince iš Anglijos, iš Lancasterio. Mes susipažinome prieš eilę metų per Lindy Hop'ą, tačiau pats Danas dirba universitete kaip dėstytojas, kuris dėsto apie kibernetinę apsaugą, cybersecurity. Tad manyčiau, čia vienas iš tų dalykų, apie kurį mes šiandien šnekėsime, taip pat daug apie Lindy Hop'ą, kadangi jis yra mano Lindy Hop'o brolis. Taip gavosi istoriškai ir žiūrėsim, kur toliau mūsų pokalbis nueis. Tad jeigu jums skamba įdomu ir žinote anglų kalbą, prašau toliau klausytis ir pradedam anglų kalbą podcastą. So, hey Dan, hello and welcome to Tiesiog Podcast'e, which means like simply a podcast. I guess that's how I would say, like the English translation would be.
Yeah, well, it's thanks for having me on. It's great to have the chance to have a conversation about life, the universe, and everything.
Yes, I mean, this is our typical Tuesday, right?
Yeah. Well, it would have been sit around, watch people dance on Thursday, and have a chat about life.
Of course,
and,
it is a Thursday. Yeah. Oh my God, this is just perfect. I didn't make that connection till now. Yeah, because to those who don't know, I mean, Thursday is our Lindy Hop night in Lancaster. That's what it used to be. So that's where we definitely used to gather up. And I mean, when I started thinking about opening up the podcast from Lithuanian language to English, like you were one of the first people like, yes, I need to get Dan on. And
well, thank you. That's very kind. And also Thursday was Taekwondo night as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I know you've gone into Taekwondo way more than I, because you got to red belt, right?
Yeah, I got to red belt, and then it was about the same time as I was working towards the higher belt, but it was about the same time as I started Lindy Hop.
Okay.
And then, it's one of those things. I was tired from work. I went to Taekwondo training, and I knew as soon as I turned up, I probably shouldn't be there because I was tired. And I did, we practice sparring, and I did a jumping spinning hook kick, and I landed, and the bottom half of my leg stayed still, and the top half of my leg carried on rotating, and I completely bust my knee. Oh. And so I kind of got to that point where I was like, well, I was out for a very long time from both Taekwondo and dancing, and I had to make a decision about which one I wanted to carry on with. And so I kind of decided that actually I quite like dancing much more than I like kicking things. So I cried off Taekwondo, got my knee a bit better, still not 100%, and now I'm carried on with the dancing, and that's how we met. Well, Taekwondo and through, I think, because you started Taekwondo about the same time as about the same time. You started Taekwondo while I was still doing it, I think, or did you?
I think there's maybe one or twice. I think I remember you in the class for a bit. I mean, I started both Taekwondo and Lindy at the same time. Right. That was like my starting point in integrating in Lancaster after I moved there, because I think I realized within the first couple of weeks, like, either I just be alone in an empty flat, or I get to know people. And so Taekwondo was kind of a very obvious thing somehow. Like, I thought I'd like to do martial arts. And I was like, hey, there's a Taekwondo club, and obviously I didn't know anything, but it was lucky that Alex and Becky running, who were the most awesome, friendly people in the world. So it was like, that was a very quick integration to the local community. And then Lindy Hop, like, because of Russia, started that. And man, that just blew up unexpectedly in my life.
Yeah. I mean, I started Lindy Hop because Alex and Becky were the Taekwondo instructors, and they were doing Lindy Hop, and they said I should do Lindy Hop to improve my footwork for my sparring. Makes
sense.
So that's how I started it. But And
then it hijacked all of your Taekwondo career and plans.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And then it really got into aerials. So in some ways, kind of a lot of the Taekwondo stuff really helped with that. But I love dancing. I love Lindy Hop, and I love that whole creativity and like the sort of the community that comes from that, which has gone through some challenging times recently.
Sure.
Especially with sort of the global pandemic. But yeah, for me, it was really about the society and the community, and I really get where you're coming from in terms of the you got to get yourself out of the flat. I mean, it's about 10 years ago now. I kind of got divorced and was living on my own, and I just took on a whole load of things to get myself out of my apartment, and Taekwondo was one of those. going to art classes was another one. You know, it's just like getting out, finding your community. I think is is important, and finding other ways to kind of stimulate your brain outside of your day-to-day work is also really important.
I think it's essential. I remember ages ago, I read this book called How to Live on 24 Hours a Day. It's an old book. I think it's like written at the beginning of 20th century or like end of even 19th century. Like it's a small book. But the whole idea, like the premise behind it is that it doesn't matter how successful you are or which like societal level you are or whatever, all of us have the same currency, which is time, and all of us have the same amount of currency, which is 24 hours. And so there was the idea of like how to live and utilize those 24 hours best. And so there was like two key things that I took from the book that then implemented in my life. So first one was that how you plan your day, like your work day, so say 8 to 5, 9 to 5, you should do exactly the same thing to plan your evening day, which is like after you get home. Because if you take simple maths, like, you know, so say you have 8 hours of sleep, which you must use, then you have, let's say, 10 hours for work, because that's, you know, paying the bills and that kind of stuff. And then you're still left with 6 to 8 hours, right, of your time. And that time is typically unmanaged at all. And then you end up, you know, kind of wasting that time. And so if you put any structure to it, you will realize how more productive you can feel, how many more things you can achieve, and so on. And the second thing of that is exactly how then to use that evening time. And the key suggestion there was, find like a hobby, a thing you really want to dive into, that you are genuinely interested and that fascinates you much more. Because the energy, the excitement, and the creativity that you get from that will then feed in directly into your work. So, because typically, you know, the 9 to 5 work for vast majority of people is like a complete drag. So you need to have some sort of like stimulating outlet or input to your life, and those evening hobbies are exactly the suggested area for that. And I think in the book they talked about like listening to opera and kind of like diving into that like the technical side of things, the musical and etc., but like or chess or whatever. But it made me kind of rethink a lot of the way I manage my time, and it really I think it helped out to be even more productive and kind of feel more productive, but in a healthy way, rather than kind of being just like constantly, you know, driving in and just burning out.
Yeah, I guess the sort of, for me, it's about not like being a control freak, but having control over how you use your time and not really allowing other things to control you. You know, like you know, if you don't, you know, the classic thing is if you don't make a decision, you're making a decision kind of thing. And
or you're allowing others to make a decision for you, which is even worse.
Yeah. So and you know, it is very easy to be consumed by the things that are around, right? TV is very addictive, and you know, binge watching Netflix, and you know, next thing you know, it's like 12 o'clock, and you should have been in bed 2 hours ago. And all the, everything's designed to grab your attention and sustain it these days. So it's in some ways having that, being able to exert that control and having that discipline is really important, and it's actually something I'm super rubbish at. So I have a really you know, I recognize in myself, I have a very, when I start on things, I have a very singular focus. So like particularly like anything creative or anything technical, you know, I think it comes from when I was doing my undergrad and being and coding and doing lots of computer science, being really super geeky. But you know, I will start something and I just, you know, that the focus is, you know, I'll very quickly get into the zone, and I'm just that's it. Like, and I can't get out. You know, it's very, you know, I'll be there for like 10 hours doing the one thing, and I realized I haven't drunk anything, I haven't gone, you know, I haven't got up for a walk, and and I fixed the problem, but you know, I'm just like,
at what cost?
I've gone to bit. So I've got this, you know, I'm full of weird things, but one of the things that I try to manage how I apply that focus and try and break it up, because I know if I get into that sort of zone, then that's it. It's very difficult for me to drag myself out of that.
Right, but I mean, it sounds like to me that you just have too much creativity boiling through you, unless you like, I mean, which is I think, kind. I mean, that's what this suggests me, because otherwise, you know, the other way would be that there's nothing to focus on because you have no idea what to do, so you're kind of just like pinballing around your life, and which I've have both. I think once I kind of have my life in decent order, then I'm much more of a like creativity volcano to some extent, and you just kind of you want to do things like this project, this idea, and you kind of just want to try things out and see what can be done.
Yeah, well, it depends. You might want to talk to my girlfriend about that. You talk to Sarah about it because one of the other thing, it's like the rest of the world doesn't exist when I'm super focused on stuff,
Sure.
and I don't even have to have headphones on, and like she'll have to ask me to kind of do something about 4 or 5 times before I even realize she's talking to me because I'm so concentrating and stuff. So it's not necessarily great for relationships, being brutally honest, but it's good for getting some complicated stuff done.
Yeah, but I would probably suggest that, not suggest, but like I would think that, well, in relationships, you just have to be upfront and kind of proactive, same as here, right? You have to kind of be proactive and say, look, this is how I operate. And sure, it's not ideal, but can we make it work? Like, what kind of system can we put in place for it to be manageable?
Yeah.
And I think it's like that's exactly kind of the key is like whether you're more proactive or more reactive in life. And these concepts, I think it's in the book called the five habits of highly successful people, if I remember correctly. Great little book
so
about
seven. Is it 7 habits?
Is it 5, 7, something like that? Yeah,
7. I think it's 7 habits.
And so one of the habits, exactly, like just practice that proactiveness, kind of get ahead of things, and exactly what I said before is like you make the decision yourself rather than it's being made for you. And I know, I mean, with my current relationship with Osha, that's what I try to do as much as possible. I'm still not perfect at it, but way, way, way better than any previous relationship. But because I think both of us are exactly on this mode of trying to be proactive, try to get ahead of any potential problem we would have, or if there's something's kind of brewing, straight away, like diffuse it, talk about it, communicate the situation, and then move on happily, right? And that seems to be a way better way than just kind of to wait for things blow up, just have all the drama, have like sleepless nights, have fights, like fuck.
Yeah, nothing ever bad happens if you just push your feelings deep down inside you and like never deal with them. Like that's a perfect way of behaving, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's my first divorce. So yeah, that's fuck, man. That's not a fun period of life. The following couple of years with that specifically.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Yeah, you do a lot of thinking about who you are when it's like a significant relationship like that breaks up. So I know what that's like.
Yeah, I think it's like I can't remember who made this analogy, but it's like whenever that level of relationship breaks, it's as if you were building a construct of your world and life, and the just vanished. And thus, as a consequence, you must start rebuilding it. I mean, that's the only way to do it. But rebuilding it after what you build, a huge tower or whatever building you imagine, it takes time because you have to clean all the rubble, find what's still healthy, what you must toss out, and just start assembling things again. But I mean, I don't know how about you, but like I found that process painful, long, tiring, and yet phenomenal. Like without it, I think I would be a way weaker human as a consequence.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I kind of recognized or realized is, and then doing a lot of reading subsequently, you kind of realize how much, I think when you're younger as well, it's much more of a habit, but you define yourself by the other, right? Either a relationship with another thing, right? And typically, if you're in a long-term relationship, you define yourself with, by the relationship you have with the other person, and that creates a very strong dependency, right? So you can't, your identity is defined by the dependency you have with on those relationships. And one of the things that I tried to focus on and think about really was developing a strong sense of independence, so that I wasn't defined. I defined myself in some ways without getting a little bit new age and hippie, but trying to define who I was and understanding who I was, so that I could go forward in any future relationships from that kind of position of strength, because I knew who I was and what I wanted. And one of the things that I read about relationships is this idea that so many relationships are built on dependence, but really you need to have a come from a place of independence so that you can become interdependent. So it's kind of like so you still, with the interdependent is that you still independent of each other, you still exist and you still work, but there is there's a stronger sense of relationship. There's the dependency's gone.
Anyway. I think about it as a partnership. I think once I made that switch in my mind, then I think a lot of things start falling in a much better place. Because I started thinking about that relationship as kind of maybe a very old school, like way before 100+ years ago. I mean, a marriage was more of a business relationship type of thing, right? It's kind of like either a political thing if you're like in the higher echelons of the society, or just pure survival strategy, right? It's like, look, I can do some things, you can do things better. Why don't we do things together? And that's going to help increase our probability and our children's probability of survive. Fair enough. Like, and which is obviously takes all the romance out of it, but at the same time, as a consequence, I think, I mean, now it's exactly that. It's a partnership. I mean, so it's two, and in a partnership, like if you think about like business partnership as an example, every part of the team needs to be a strong individual with their own competences so they can pull forward, right? You don't want to have somebody either you being dragged behind or the person's being dragged by you, and as a consequence, right? So you need to have these two exactly strong individuals that then just by being together make the whole situation like 1 + 1 = 5, 8, whatever, that kind of thing. And I guess it's different words for interdependence. Just I use, I think, partnership, because then I think partner is a more correct description of that relationship rather than this kind of boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever words can use. Just for in my own personal vocabulary, I find that partnership is the more correct, I guess, description.
Don't disagree. I mean that. It is interesting, and I certainly think that's shaped the whole thing. Just shapes your worldview and starts to get you to really think. One of the things I found that I developed from that is just more of a stronger ability to critically evaluate things. In a much more dispassionate way. Which is, I think really helped me in terms of the career that I've got in working in a university and in academia and doing science and research. And it seems strange to say that having a divorce helps you to think critically, but I mean, that's
it makes sense.
Positive things that came out of it. That I can really critically evaluate and take myself out of my own, to a certain extent, some of my own biases.
And just take the emotion out of it. I think that's the thing. That's the most important about it. I mean, I know before divorce, I mean, that was always at the back of my mind, or even at the front of my mind. It's like, so what will other person feel and think if I say this or that, and that kind of consideration. And once again, maybe it sounds unempathetic, but I mean, you just take that out. It's basically to minimize the human factor in any decision making as possible, right? That seems to help. I mean, I haven't insulted people, I think. I haven't offended anybody.
Not that they've told you.
Yeah, not that they told me exactly, if anything. But I mean, if I crossed the line so badly, then they would have told me one way or another, I think.
Yeah, well, maybe not in the UK, because you're about twice as tall as everybody over here, so...
Yeah, but a lot of people are just outrageous regardless in throwing insults left and right. I think that's what I would say. Especially in Glasgow. I mean, I lived in Glasgow, and that shit just doesn't fly there. If you cross the line, people let you know.
I think that's definitely a cultural thing.
Yeah.
I think in England we're a bit more stiff upper lipped, and
we were talking about this after we moved back to Lithuania with Rochelle. Like, what are the communication type differences you have between Lithuanian society and English society? And I think it's an interesting thing. So if I would suggest, like, there's like 3 levels of communication. So first would be like very shallow, like, hi, how are you? That kind of thing. Second would be like actually asking, how are you and how was your day, for example, like small inquiry. And the third one would be actually have a conversation. I think in England, it's so easy to do first level, and it's quite straightforward to get to the second level. But getting to third level, it seems to be you need to really put the effort. While I think in Lithuania, it's reversed. Getting through the first level is hard as fuck, but then moving to second and third, it becomes very, very easy. So in Lithuania, you see a lot of people just with these kind of faces standing and waiting. But if you kind of break through that by being polite and nice and just smile, then you can actually very quickly get to talking about deep, interesting conversations, I find.
Yeah, I mean, I've had it because the university is a very international community, and we have a lot of international staff. I have conversations with them over a coffee or a cup of tea, and they they say they find sometimes the UK is quite disingenuous in terms of the way that people are, but that it comes across sometimes as very false, and because we're all very much like, hi, how you doing? But it's very, like you say, very superficial. It's just a politeness. I was talking to somebody who was Spanish and who was working in one of the food outlets as the chef, and he was saying he just found it really weird that we would be saying please and thank you all the time for stuff. Whereas his experience of working in restaurants back home was very much more like, get this, do this, no, please and thank you, very task orientated. So it's like the English are all levels of screwed up, like, all levels of repressed, screwed upness. Our society's got a lot of problems, but I guess every society has.
Precisely. I mean, and it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just like a different feature of the society. And it took me, definitely a very, very long time until I identified this. I could actually understand this, and then managed to get to the third level. So, for example, like you and Sarah and Alex and Becky were my first people in UK, like from England, that actually I would consider friends. Like that we actually got to the third level and the fourth level quite commonly. Yeah. I mean, and before everybody else, fundamentally, looking back, I would just maybe because I haven't figured out, I haven't learned how to kind of build those kind of level of relationships. Looking back, it just always felt like it was kind of more a very good acquaintance, but never a friend, like never jumped a friend. I mean, with Lithuanian people I knew in England, that was very quickly, like you get to third, fourth, fifth level, no problem. But with specifically English people, I always struggled with that. And so after coming to Lancaster and then spending a couple of years there and getting to know you more and Alex and Becky more, and we have those dinner parties and everything, that's when I think I got the idea how to get to that level. And then, fantastic.
Yeah, I think we have with the English. I don't want to really speak for the other nations in the UK, but the English have a very pleasant veneer over the top of a very hard wall, right? So
yes,
it's all very nice, but to actually get through that, and one of the things again that I've tried to do in my own personal life is to, I think that's where the idea of disingenuous like perception comes from. So what I've tried to do is combine those in a much more to close the gap, right, to break that wall down. And it doesn't come without certain problems, and it leaves you a bit more exposed, but by and large it always works out, and then you have a community of friends to talk to if it does go wrong. So but it's hard. Personal relationships are weird.
And I think looking back at it, just constantly reanalyzing my life anyways, I think the more stronger of an individual I came, like when I think about myself and my own identity and how I define myself, the better relationships I could actually harness with other people. Because any kind of insecurities that stemmed from me and then I used to justify them on the other person, like blame them for not doing something which is purely coming from me, now they're pretty much gone. Because like if let's say, a simple example is like you haven't spoken to somebody for a few months, right? And they never called you, and like, why did they never call me? Well, obviously then their answer would be, well, why you never called yourself, right? So it's a vicious loop, which is like a stupid thing. So it's like, all right, fair enough. So that's this vicious loop. And if I want to talk to somebody, well, then just call them. Simple as that, right?
Yeah.
And strangely, it just took me a long time to kind of properly assess and put it in my mind. And after this, like, hey, much easier.
It's like the strong friendships you have. It doesn't really, as long as you're not shitty with each other. It doesn't. The best friendships I have are the ones that you just pick up the call next to like you saw them yesterday, and you because I think they're built out of a place of strength, like, and I think it's I've reflecting on some of my own prior friendships when I was much younger. The ones that are, oh, well, you didn't ring me, or this, that, and the other. There's clearly some level of dependency there, and and a need, which then, depending on if you're the one that's dependent or the other side is the one that's dependent, then that's just going to be a drain. And I think that it's the partnership idea that you are identifying puts you at equal level, and the dependency moves you away from that.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't think we'd be talking about like relationship advice. I feel completely unqualified to be talking about this. So I'm going to preface this, the scientist in me is based. This was all opinion. Like there's no scientific basis to anything that I'm saying. So buyer beware. If you go out and implement this, don't come and sue me. Because I have no scientific A/B tests or
but you have doctor in front of your name, same as me, so that's the issue, right?
Yeah. My doctorate is in computer science, so I can barely make a computer work these days. So I wouldn't trust me on relationship advice.
And yet, I mean, I think there's like 2 points that come to my mind. So first of all, this just kind of speaks then to the open format of this podcast and the whole idea just to have a conversation and just see wherever it takes you, right?
Yeah.
Not to have like a list of questions and like interview style, which I think that's exactly the problem. Even though we talked about what things we'd like to discuss, if we actually followed the list, we would have never dived into this conversation, which is fascinating.
I'm just worried that people are now going to, I mean, maybe that's just playing to my ego that people are going to rush out and follow my advice on relationships. But I just need to put like a little bit of a
disclaimer,
preface, a disclaimer, like none of the prior 20 minutes has got anything to do with it's based in scientific fact whatsoever.
I would probably say that it's like a mix, most likely, like a scientific methodology applied with life experience, with opinion. Probably it's a mixture of all. Because any of those suggestions, I think we talked about, I mean, we both read it in various literature, and obviously we had our trial and error ourselves by life, which is not ideal, but a form of scientific method. So I mean, I think
but a sample of one is not necessarily convenient sample of one is not necessarily a rigorous scientific method that I
is
would
also
necessarily advocate any of my PhD students to follow.
Correlation does not mean causation. We love this phrase, and just remember that, right?
I mean, basically what we've done is just dumped out a whole load of relationship hypotheses that other people need to go away and do some tests. Get some high quality psychologists and social scientists out there. I mean, I'm sure there is some literature about this.
Yeah, I mean, I know I'm constantly testing those hypotheses in my own life, regardless. And this is at least what we talked about is like the best model I've built so far. And is it perfect? Obviously not. Is it going to be better? Most likely. I hope so.
Yeah. But is it generally applicable? That's the scientific question. Is it a generally applicable model? Anyway.
I mean, if so then on the contrary, you want people to try this out to find out if it is.
Yeah. Well, people can write in. People can write into the podcast.
Absolutely. Any questions, especially legal things, just take it to the Queen and she'll handle it. I think she has a very strong legal team from what I gathered these days.
Yeah. I thought Alshra was the Queen, right? And then maybe in your...
Yeah, and in your case, Sarah, so...
Yeah,
just send them. They'll deal with this. We're just going to keep the content creating and having fun, right? Fair enough. So then I would like to change the course a bit. And since you're lecturing in cybersecurity and that is your hook on life, like, this is where you are an expert and you would feel qualified in talking, not from your ass or opinion, but legit, right? In general, I mean, I would like to think of myself like as a aware person of cybersecurity, because I've been, using a computer since I was like 4 or 5. I've been always the one fixing them in my life and the home and so on, and building them to some extent, and looking ways to hack things. So I have some idea of like very, very like first level, but some idea of what's happening behind the curtain. But I mean, where do you think in general? I think you deal with students, you deal with businesses or other kind of outlets. What is the state of cybersecurity awareness, and what common ignorances people have about the word or their notion of cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I've been around it for a very long time. I've seen the perceptions change. I've seen the conversations change. There's again, just talking from my own kind of perception of and my own experience of cybersecurity, we're just not there. We've as particularly in the UK, in Europe, we are still not doing or taking it seriously enough, right? Individuals aren't taking it seriously enough, and it's not because they're deliberately not taking it seriously enough. I think if you ask a random person in the street, they'll probably say, "Oh yeah, no, we need to make sure that cybersecurity, my own cybersecurity is important." Because people are becoming aware that actually, these days you can't exist without technology, right? We wouldn't be able to do this without technology.
Absolutely.
And we wouldn't, in the case of a global pandemic, we wouldn't be able to talk to each other, talk to our own families, without technology. But, in some way, sort of cybersecurity we haven't found, the experts haven't really found a way of making security easy.
What do you mean by that?
So, this is very... So how many of your friends, when they send you an email, have you got digital signatures in those emails to actually verify that it's come from them? How many emails do you get from businesses that have digital signatures that verify that email has come from that particular business? This is a very basic verification thing. It's a technology that's been around for 3 decades, and yet it's not massively prevalent. And there's been a lot of research around this, and there's a really famous paper called "Why Johnny Can't Encrypt" that looks at the hurdles associated with that. So we're not making it easy to have a baseline security, right? So let's think about it another way. You wouldn't buy a house that didn't have any locks.
Depends where you live. Apparently in Canada, that's fine.
Yeah, some territories that might still be fine, right?
Yeah.
But yet we're all using an email service which doesn't have proof of who's sending.
Sure, that's fair
right?
point.
And
I guess
part of that is...
I guess like the email address, that's first level indication that's coming ideally from somebody.
You can spoof that. I can send you an email coming from Donald Trump if I wanted to. It's not that difficult. The only way to prove where it's come from is using cryptographic tools, right? And so we're not we don't have those mechanisms built in by default. We don't, for various reasons, cost, whatever. There's no consumer demand. And one of the reason why we don't have security is not a technology issue. Like I say, the technology is like 30 years old. It's an economic issue. So if you look at authors like Ross Anderson, Bruce Schneier, Halvarian, like a couple of these key kind of authors, they basically say, well, why is security not being adopted?
Right.
It's not because we don't know how to do it, but it's just not there. And it's an economic issue. So how does a normal person in the street know if one product is more secure than another? Right? You're going to go to your local PC software store, let's say, back when we used to buy software in boxes.
Yep.
And you go there and you've got 2 different pieces of software that do roughly the same task, and you pick the boxes up and you go, how do I know which one's better? How do I know which one's more secure? And there's no way for customers to discern which product is more secure. So first off, we have a market failure. So if your whole economy is built on a kind of a market, capitalist kind of thing, where the buyer has enough information to drive out bad products from the market, and then the buyer can't discern, you've got that first problem, right?
Sure.
But then you've also got a bunch of other economic incentives, and these aren't my arguments. I'm stealing them from better academics than myself. But there's a famous paper by George Akerlof looking at what's called the market for lemons, and in this case, lemon is a failed car. Is a bad car, like it's a kind of American term, and if you've got a series of bad cars and a series of good cars, then your good car is like, you sell it for $2,000, and a bad car is probably worth 500 quid.
Right.
What's the market price? Right. What's the average market price that you would sell? And when you go through the kind of the maths and the economics of it, what you find is that you have no incentive, if you have a good car, to sell it in the marketplace, because the lemons drive down the price of the market, drive down the price in the market. And so what happens is people withdraw good products from the market, and you end up with the crap ones.
Interesting. I don't know if that's really the case, because I would, you would divide the market, and you would just have products of higher quality and lesser quality, no?
No, because if your customer can't discern, which is you've got two cars and they can't tell you which one's a lemon and which one isn't, but the seller does. So there's information asymmetry there, right?
Oh, okay.
So
I see.
So I as a buyer can't tell you which is a good car and which is a bad car, right? And so what happens is the good products, the good cars, get taken out of the market, because why would you sell your £2,000 worth of car for like the average price of the two? You'd get less money. There's no point in you doing it. So you withdraw those products from the market. And we see this repeatedly in software, because customers can't discern the quality of the product. Good quality products get withdrawn from the market because they cost more to produce, right? So why would you spend all that effort if, and there's a number of examples of this. And so you've got all these other issues. So there's a race to the bottom in terms of software tools.
Okay.
Software applications generally.
To me, this sounds like right. So clearly, if the system is, its trend is negative fundamentally, right? So it's moving in a direction that nobody wants to. Then, to me, this sounds like then putting you. One of the solutions is so you'd have to take the responsibility of cybersecurity away from the customer. Like it shouldn't be a customer's choice. It should be by default in all products, right? As a seatbelt is in a car, by default, it sounds like then the certain level or certain standard of cybersecurity must be implemented in everything, right? As a baseline. But I assume that's not the case, right?
But that's what we're seeing. That's the only way to do that is to mandate, is to legislate. And that's what we've seen happen. So the General Data Protection Regulation, all these new laws that are coming out in the European Union is because of the industry not regulating itself, and the customers not being able to discern. So what they have to then do, it's what's called an externality. Economically, it's what's called an externality. So what you're doing is you're pushing, as a provider, you're pushing the negative effects onto your consumers or somebody else. So you're not paying the full cost of them. And so when you have those types of situations, then what happens is legislators have to step in. And that's why you're starting to see now, the data protection laws, and you're starting to see moves for mandating certain types of security in Internet of Things and smart home technologies, because fundamentally consumers can't discern, and the industry has no major incentive to fix the problem itself. And this is where I come back to. It's like people are aware that cybersecurity is a problem, but they can't make an informed choice. And the people who are in the best position to be able to fix it have no economic incentive to do so. And so then you have legislation, but then legislation takes decades. They have to realize it, and then you have the bigger problem. You got me started, right? So then you have a bigger problem that most governments have a very fixed term, like 4 years, right? And so if a legislation takes a number of years to even get on the books, even gets on the books to be spoken about, then you could end up with the government going out before they even pass the bill, right? And then you have a significant number of conversations, and this is particularly prevalent if you read a lot of literature that comes out of the States, that security and these not security, but legislation and these restrictions is an anathema to innovation and creativity. So if you legislate and you control, then you will get in the way of innovation, and therefore you'll get in the way of growth. And this is a particular, it's not a thing that I personally believe, but if you look at a lot of the history of cybersecurity in the States, you will see time and again the lobbyists coming in and saying, you can't pass that cybersecurity requirement law because it's going to get in the way of our industry and the growth. And you don't want to be the president that introduces a law that stops your economy growing. And in actual fact, if you look at the history, the States was one of the first countries to really take cybersecurity seriously, but they are further behind than pretty much everywhere else until recently, because they constantly have this again, it comes down to economics, right? It comes down to business. It's not a technical issue. It's a societal issue.
Yeah, but I mean, just thinking about it now, that argument about prohibiting innovation doesn't make any fucking sense. Because
I know that.
Yeah, like it's kind of like do you follow the right to repair movement?
Yeah.
I guess worldwide, right? And that's exactly the argument that they provide there. Like I heard this argument by listening to a number of which I don't know why, but I mean just like local councils discussing this topic in various states in the U.S. And yeah, lobbyists provide this is basically by giving out the information on how you can repair your thing, you're prohibiting the companies to innovate new products and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you're not. You're on the contrary. And this argument is so flawed. It doesn't make sense. You're just convoluting two things which are not related at all. On the contrary, I would argue, if your product, it's kind of once again like cybersecurity, in my current opinion, it should be like a baseline. You must ensure it's there for your product to be, allowed to be sold. Like I know, for example, how in the current company I work in, before a radiation detector can be sold in any market, it needs to be verified and it has to go through a national laboratory basically to do all the certification. You have to go, like there's a rigorous process before your your instrument is approved to being able to sold as an instrument, right? And it seems like for software, then you kind of have to have a similar type of system where like there are just a number of criteria your device or software in this case must comply with. And thus cybersecurity seems like one of those very, very obvious ones you have to ensure, right? It doesn't matter what else your product does. But it's kind of like if you buy a hammer and it shocks you. It's like, why is this hammer shocking me? It doesn't make sense. But you never asked to test us whether a hammer couldn't shock you. It's like, the fuck are you talking about, right? So there's like this kind of the baseline you should ensure. And then the innovation argument, it's like it doesn't impede at all when it comes to cybersecurity.
But you've got to understand that the lobbyists' goal is really not an argument around whether innovation is a good or a bad thing. It's around don't make my company spend more money than it has to. That's fundamental to their argument, and they're conflating that with innovation, right? So simple. Let's do some simple calculations, right? So say Facebook has to implement some sort of security feature. Mm-hmm. That security feature will come with just a processing cost, right? In terms of energy, because it has to perform some more calculations. Say it costs 1 pence per user per year, right? How many millions of users as Facebook got? It massively scales it up, and that leaves out all the development effort. And the other thing you got to remember, Facebook's model is the business model is you're the business, right?
Yes.
So you need to so really what the lobbyists are doing is just finding any argument which will enable their company not to spend more money than it has to be able to deliver the product. So that's an economic, again, it's an economic thing. But then if you go back to your point, you're right. Fundamentally, anybody who's buying any form of electronic product these days is buying it knowing that it is fundamentally flawed, right? You bought buy a smartphone. The next day you're getting a software update because fundamentally it was broken, right?
I guess.
And we accept that. We buy operating systems that run our lives, run our workplaces, knowing that every week or whatever the patch cycle is, we're going to get updates because the software that we bought was so screwed up that it needs to be regularly fixed. Can you imagine buying a car and you have to take it to the garage every day? Every week, to fix something that was broken. The software industry, I think, has a lot of problems. Security is one of them. Mm-hmm. How do you remove the human error from the development? I mean, the stuff that I write and I develop, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't go anywhere and it's proof of concept and it only has to work for 5 minutes to do the bit of data processing that I need to do. But we always ask the classic question in computer science degrees. How confident are you in your code? Are you happy writing it for a nuclear power station? Are you happy writing it for this, that, and the other? And because of the price of microprocessors and the flexibility they have, everything is codable, right?
Yes.
And that's whereas before it was an electronic engineering problem.
Yes.
where you had to combine transistors and capacitors and resistors and inductors and all of these things to create the functionality. Now it's we put a microcontroller in it, and then we use that to do the stuff that we would have done analog in an analog way, or even in a kind of semi-digital way or digital way. And it's about getting it out to market first, and so that's where the challenge comes, because every time you say, well, we've got to meet this, we've got to meet that, you're pushing the deliverable nature of the product back, right? Because you're adding further constraints which you have to meet, and that's going to then have an economic impact on your ability to sell that product.
And then fundamentally, you're inevitably going to start looking for various shortcuts that are unnoticeable, but will help you to reach the over-ambitious or over-optimistic delivery dates that you promised, right?
Yeah, because whenever you're developing something, sorry, I'm shuffling around. Whenever you're developing something, right, even if you're developing a security product for use, it still has to have some functionality.
Sure.
And so your trade-off is between the function. You've got a finite resource. How do you allocate that resource to achieve our goal of a saleable product? And so a highly secure product that has no functionality won't sell.
Sure.
So how do
unless the government bids, right? Because they
no, but why would why would you buy a safe that has the most amazing lock but no space in it?
Oh, sure, right? Sure, fair enough.
Yeah, so it's about the functionality you want it for. So you at some level you have to have a trade-off between the resources you expend to protect and the resources you expend to provide functionality. And various people will buy different quality bits of goods and all this type of stuff. But it's a really interesting conundrum. And one of the things that we teach on our program, our MSc program, or I teach, is really trying to link this question of cybersecurity not as a purely technical question, but as a societal question and as a business question, to say, well, this is not just about taking some technology and using it. This is about actually how much security is enough, right?
Sure.
And the other thing is, as nearly every single society, we have opted to provide to enable others to give us protection, right?
Yeah.
Because we've devolved that to the police force, the intelligence, military. Pretty much every single country does. You're not a militia of one, right? And so within cultural consciousness, in some ways we're expecting others to protect us from this. And so one of the things I was thinking about, just the other day, is how that relates to cybersecurity. And I've said before, I think cybersecurity is a generational issue, right? We go. There was a recent, I can't remember what it was for, but Volvo did an ad recently. And they basically had a whole bunch of people reading letters from when car companies were forced to include seatbelts.
Yeah. I was always thinking about this example.
Yeah, and that's kind of where we're at now. We're in a generational thing. Because the other thing that a lot of cybersecurity, we haven't experienced a lot of cybersecurity. I mean, the other thing I'm always mindful of is this is the first time we are ever experiencing this type of revolution.
Absolutely.
Right. So we don't know it's not like this is the second time round and we've learned from the first time.
Yeah.
This is fundamentally, this technology is fundamentally changing the way that we're thinking. And so there are a lot of problems we don't understand. And the big one was, a while back was around, well, what about all these people on social media when they're going for jobs when they're older? And, they're finding pictures of them drunk, in gutters, in streets and all this stuff. How's that, because, and then we got increased legislation around that, kind of some protections. But we now have children, but people being born into a completely digital world, their whole identity, their whole virtual, they've got a completely virtual presence, like their record of their birth, actually the paper doesn't mean anything, right? And a couple of years ago, we saw an increasing trend of companies who are providing services for children. So things like nanny cams and those types of virtual technologies. So bought by parents, but to support children and those types of stuff. And these companies, which were containing quite a lot of information about the children, were being targeted and attacked. And one of everybody was going, well, why are you stealing things about information about kids? What's the risk there? This, that, and the other. And me and myself and a few others were talking, and we basically said, well, if I was a bad guy, steal the identity of a 5-year-old, wait till they're 18, and then apply for a whole load of credit or whatever the current, and they have a clean credit record before they even can go away and do, apply for their own credit. I can just set some stuff up. It can be all automated and just steal hundreds of thousands, in that person's name, and they're completely screwed basically by that time.
That's right.
Because they just don't know it. Their whole digital life's been stolen before they're even an adult. And these are the types of things that we really need to I think these longer term systemic things are the things we really need to think and worry about, rather than the kind of the shorter term, my phone was, my password was stolen, all this type of stuff. Actually, what are the longer term systemic risks that we're storing up for society, within finance, within critical national infrastructure? And that's one of the things that I'm really interested in.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, a lot of my thoughts on this topic were in very similar vein. I think I started thinking about it much more deeply after I read Edward Snowden's book, The Permanent Record. Because basically he just beautifully outlined how exactly the huge discrepancy between the user's awareness of cybersecurity and the government's intelligence ability to actually just completely exploit anything. And I think one of the key notions of the book is basically anybody who's born after, I think, 88, something like that, basically in the United States, their whole life is monitored. Like all your digital footprint you've left, it's there if needed, basically, because the intelligence community has this ability, basically, by tracking phone, by tracking all these kind of things. So there's now more than one generation of people whose whole life has been surveyed to one way or another. And it's like, right, that doesn't sound good. So it's like kind of thinking about it much more. And the more I think about, especially what you said now, there's like two ideas that come to my mind. First one is, the whole seatbelt conundrum that happened in the car industry. And I think, if I remember correctly, after the seatbelt has been invented and the patent of it has become open-ended, I think by one of the Volvo engineers, it took another 30 or 40 years until the legislature said, every car must have a seatbelt. And I mean, I can only assume not only the lobbyist outage, what you've mentioned, but also just people making an argument, hey, it's my seatbelt, it's my right to drive without a seatbelt, blah, 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 those kind of things.
It's my right to drive really fast with a non-seatbelt car and kill myself if I want to.
Exactly, and other 50 people or whatever.
Yeah.
So I most likely those arguments have just like, it's like the whole history repeats itself kind of thing. And most likely the same thing is happening here. And at the same time, I was like, okay, so there's definitely a developmental time and growth time. What you said, generalization too, for that, the security to catch up with the development and the exploitation. Because I think with any new technology, there's probably few classes of people utilizing this. So there's the people who are genuinely developing for their own curiosity and greater good, whatever. There's probably government implementation. There's like people who want to do business, and then there's obviously a huge market which is basically exploiting the wave of the new technology, right? And just at various costs to other people, sometimes their own health, to personal information, whatever it might be. And so I think, because when it comes to internet and the current state we live in, I mean, the world changes every 5 years. I would say probably technologically. Like if you think about what technology we had in 2015 and now, I mean, the jump is tangible, hugely tangible, right? Well, I would say probably if you compare what happened between 1950 and 1960 to like a standard member of the society, it's most likely way more minuscule than we have now,
I mean,
right?
sorry, just to jump in, I remember when I was looking around universities in 95, 96, showing my age, I went to one university, right? So it's not that long. I don't feel like it's that long ago.
Sure.
I went to one university and like to look at the computer science department, and the prof there, it was a good UK university. I mean, like very good university. And they were like, and this is our computer lab. And like, sort of hushed tones, and all of our computers are connected to the internet. Like that was like it was rare that you had a permanent connection to the internet,
Yes.
and we in our computer lab when I started my PhD, we had like 100 megabit per second to the desktop, and that was cutting edge, that was super expensive, and it's just and now it's like, well, we got it over the air to my phone, right?
Yes, way faster.
I feel in some ways very fortunate to be able to live through and see the way that this technology has developed from something that is beige boxes on desktops that just green screen, all the way through to basically something that I can put in my pocket, which you could actually use to run a mission to Mars. It's astounding, right?
It's mind-boggling, and I think it's so commonplace that people never consider or really think about it. I think that's one of the other issues. And I think this kind of joins in with the whole idea of selling out your protection, is because, I mean, if you never generally look into what is cybersecurity and what kind of things you should consider even, then you don't have a reason to think about that cybersecurity is an issue, right? You basically outsource this thinking process to the company. You entrust that the company who made the product you buy, they're taking care of that without any competence or knowledge or even any realistic assessment if that is actually
being
the
able
case.
to discern whether it is or not.
Yeah, and that's why. And that's what kind of it leads to like thinking how to move this to the company's responsibility to ensure that's the case. But the second thing is like it made me wonder: do you think that ethical hackers is one of the areas that needs to be grown even more to prod the companies and not only the companies to kind of directly to them say, look, your product is fucked up, make it better, because it's so easy to exploit it, but also then kind of to increase the uproar in information of kind of what's the real situation. And because I think from time to time you hear various ethical hackers, I think depending on what company or government service they work in, they being like denoted as whistleblowers, and then you have a whole political process happening with them. But I mean, as a part of society and part of I guess cyber culture, I mean, they are an invaluable asset, I think. And it seems like it's just a case of, could they help in helping this problem, I guess. That's what I'm
I certainly think that the whole security testing, it is in some way it is essential. It is essential now, and having penetration testers, ethical hackers, whatever they might be called, is super important to be able to be able to test that the systems that we rely on for our daily lives are actually functioning to the right security levels that we think or government thinks is appropriate. But to be clear, that's ethical testers are basically like firefighters trying to put out the fires in California with a squirt gun, right?
Sure.
Fundamentally, companies need to stop selling crap.
But it's an accountability issue, right, as well. Because then why company should you do that if nobody calls it out on it, right? Kind of thing. It's kind of as a parent, like if you say no to a child and there's never any consequences for the child not listening to no, the no means nothing.
The problem is that technically in so many countries, the work of ethical hackers is illegal.
Yeah, which is, I think,
right?
sounds like a problem.
Yeah, it's a really big problem, right? So, because to be able to break a product requires permission from the provider of the product, right? So there's a bunch. It depends on where you are in the country.
Which is stupid, because it's kind of like you buy a hammer and you break the handle, and then the hammer making company says, "How dare you break the handle of the hammer? We sue you now for breaking the handle."
Yeah, it's slightly. I mean, the bigger problem. So it's not really about companies suing the ethical hackers, and that's certainly happened. Like getting gag orders, responsible disclosure. There's a whole load of stuff, but actually, just the laws of the land also restrict some activities, and the reason for that is because of the globalized software internet kind of market, right? So, I, as a security tester, find a weakness, and I haven't found a weakness in something like WhatsApp, right?
Yeah.
So just to clear, I haven't found a weakness. So there is but I discover something. I find a way to exploit that. I find a way to take information about who's talking to who and what their messages are. The reason why it's against the law is because if I develop that as a tool, right, and that gets out into the wild, then I'm affecting hundreds of millions of people's worth of communication, right? And so there is that really big challenge that, there is one software product for millions of people, rather than if I test and break this hammer, actually it doesn't really instantly affect a bunch of other people using the hammer, right?
Sure.
So there is a real risk associated with it, which is why good ethical hackers have a very stringent responsible disclosure policy to ensure they do it. But then you get issues around the company, because ultimately it affects the stock price. So ultimately, it becomes an economic issue.
Yeah, but it becomes the company. But that's the thing. Once again, it comes into for the company, for the responsibility to shift on the company to ensure that, once again, because if it is set out, I guess legislature is one of the options. As an example, if it is set out that the product, the software product that the company is making must ensure this level of cybersecurity, and if it doesn't, I mean. And you hear various stories of these cases happening in the last year, like the last few years, for sure. Then I think the problem starts is like the blame game starts, because then nobody likes to take the responsibility for those exploits, right? So the company tries to shift the blame to for example, the ethical hacker or whoever found this exploit or whatever. Like, it just moves around. And I think at the end of the day, is like the only way to bypass this is that the company is. If you're making a software product that is affecting, let's say, more than X amount of people, so the X amount of users you have, which whatever arbitrary number that is, then any responsibility for any exploit, it's on you, hugely. It's solely on you, right? And there's no room kind of for like divvying up here the responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. With the companies are not necessarily. My view is that a lot of companies just aren't taking the necessary responsibility they should be for providing bad software products. But the other, we're living in a really interesting time. You raised Snowden's Snowden's story.
Yeah.
But one of the things that was clear there is actually, you said it, is actually how good intelligence services are at breaking into these software platforms we use, and that's because they know where a considerable number of vulnerabilities are.
Yes,
right.
Exactly.
So they are, arguably they're ethical hackers. They found holes, but they go through a process. Most in Western intelligence agencies, anyway, have kind of sort of spoken about this publicly. But they go through a process to look at whether that vulnerability, when they discover it, has basically an intelligence worth. So should we keep it secret because it gives us an advantage over? And there's been loads of hoo-ha, particularly in the States, because the close relationship between Microsoft and the intelligence agencies there or has been implicated. And the intelligence agencies knew about a whole bunch of patches, and Microsoft came out a whole bunch of issues and didn't tell Microsoft, and Microsoft were like, Jesus, like, what's going on here? Why didn't you tell us about this? We could have fixed all, so it's, there's a whole, we haven't even, this is the first time we really touched on the politics of it, right?
Absolutely.
We've been focusing on the economics of cybersecurity, but the politics of cybersecurity is a really fascinating field.
Absolutely. Because I think even just thinking from the simple perspective that it is a weapon, right? It's a tool and a weapon. And in any warfare, when it comes to politics, warfare is the big part of it. It's information warfare. Yeah, that's, if looking through that prism, it makes perfect sense why various governmental agencies would keep those exploits in their pockets, right? Because it's like, instead of using a wooden spear, you all of a sudden have a stone spear or a metal spear. It's like, yeah, of course I'm keeping the fucking metal spear if I want to go to war. Yeah. And but at the same time, once again, it's definitely a complex issue. And then to me, it seems like, okay, so that you can think of it top down, which I guess government company down, responsibility and knowledge and competence about it. But there's obviously, I assume then there are other ways to educate or enlighten or increase the general competence and awareness of cybersecurity to the general public, right? I mean, so the more each individual is aware of that, the better the system becomes, right?
Yeah.
Because it's
but that doesn't happen overnight, right?
Oh, no, absolutely. So it has to be a systemic push for that, for sure.
Yeah, my frustration is, we know that cybersecurity is a problem, but we don't have cybersecurity really awareness courses for kids that turn up, from age 5, whenever they start school. It should be part of the curriculum. And I don't mean, we're doing quite a lot in the UK. I don't know what it's like in other countries around trying to get school kids interested in cybersecurity as a profession. But actually, we should just be teaching them that this is secure behavior online, in the same way that we should be teaching them this is how you cross a road safely, right? The internet, the digital technology we have is effectively the new road system, and we need to be able to educate people to navigate that safely. And I think that's one of our big failings generally. But at Lancaster, we've just been awarded Academic Centre of Excellence in Cybersecurity Education status, which is a piece of work that I was involved in. So the NCSC, our national sort of cybersecurity agency, is giving out these certifications, and we're one of 8 universities that have got it. And a number of our plans are going to be to really kind of work with schools at a very early age to kind of be, cybersecurity is important. You need to take it seriously. What I would love is, over the next couple of years, for school kids to be going home and go, Mum and Dad, have you changed the Wi-Fi password, or have you set a pin on your mobile phone, or and be able to explain to their parents why this is important, and get them involved in the conversation, and we'll see where we get to. But I think that's where we've got to start, right? We can't, in some ways, my age and up is a lost cause. We're never gonna really change their behavior unless they have the influence of the younger people.
Yeah, I think the only exception is probably like various hobbyists who picked it up.
Or professionals.
Yeah. I think that's what it comes from. So, do you teach your kids about cybersecurity? Since you
my kids hate me.
Yeah.
I don't let them play any games which aren't their age rating. So, they don't play Fortnite, they don't play Call of Duty. I have complete control over their phones. I track wherever they go. I tell them that I'm doing it, so it's complete disclosure. They have time limits on their phones in terms of the apps to limit them. Their friends on their social networks, on like Xbox and stuff, they have to be vetted before I allow them to be accessed on their social network on things. So I have locked that stuff down.
But but it sounds like it's not that you're educating them about cybersecurity. It's just you're more like a surveillance state who makes sure that every single step is monitored and safe.
You've just described modern parenthood, right? but through those actions, they say, well, why?
Sure.
And like, why? Because it creates a point of contention and a point of discussion. Why can't I do this? And then that gives me an opportunity to talk to them about why this is important, right? I always have I talk to them and say, why, I try to talk to them and say, well, how much time do you think you should be spending watching YouTube on a day? Sure. Right? It comes back to It comes back to our conversation at the start, right? How do you want to spend your time? And when you've got all these applications, which we've said are really there are designed to attract your attention and retain your attention.
Yes.
Then having limits even for adults, I think is sensible. But the reason the controls around allowing friends access, I explain to them, these are the reasons why, and I can showcase to them, how easy it is to pretend to be a child online, and why they can't do this, and what to look out for, and why these things are there. And I can explain to, but I'm also in a privileged position because I have these case studies to hand. I can, it's what I teach every day, so I can kind of rattle them off and go, blah blah blah. This happened the other day, or and then also, it's a bit funny because I've done a bit of TV recently on like news things about different cybersecurity attacks, and in a weird way that probably gives me more credibility than the average parent, because if I go on BBC News like telling people about cybersecurity, then I'm probably need somebody to be listened to, even with my surly teenage son. So sure. But yeah, I mean surveillance is important, in the same way as just anything, being a responsible parent, right? And it's a skill set I think a responsible parent needs to learn. And it can be difficult, but it's not. The basics are not that difficult. The basic principles are not that difficult. But I think it's just for me, just going, oh well, here's Xbox, do whatever you want on it, or here's PlayStation, do whatever you want with it, or I know you're 12, but I'm going to give you a Facebook account, and I'm going to give you a WhatsApp account, and you can have whatever friends you like on it. Just basically it's just like, well, go to the pub and just speak to whoever you want, right? That doesn't feel like responsible parenting to me.
Sure.
But I'm not necessarily in the majority.
I mean, that's definitely interesting, because I think obviously I'm a very young parent so far, so I haven't had to think of deal about this issue in particular. But you mean
Vicaris hasn't got a smartphone?
Not
Come
yet.
on, catch up.
No. We had this discussion, like when is the time for him to, like even look at a screen for any prolonged periods of time, or that kind of stuff. And we haven't answered that yet, but basically we're still kind of just minimizing to next to zero.
As late as you can make it.
Yeah. But I do wonder, just thinking how I was brought up, and one of the things that I think helped me is that my parents, I think, set out a clearly defined boundaries around what's possible, like what I can do and not. And within those boundaries, I had as much freedom as I wanted. As an example, so when I was maybe, I don't know, from 5 years old to, I guess for 5-6 years old, I could just hang out in the yard. Like, we lived in an apartment block. And, you just, let's say you say, I'll come back in a couple of hours. Right? You just leave, and parents don't look over you. You just hang out with the kids, that kind of stuff. Or you go on a bicycle and just drive around the town, or all these kind of things. So I had a lot of freedom, and obviously it meant a lot of exploration, a lot of learning things, catching up, meeting people who will become your friends, or who you definitely will avoid, who are, sure, it wasn't all daisies and fairy tales, right? But at the same time, that was always, I think it was a very valuable, just kind of getting to know life experience. And then I know, when it came to internet, I had kind of the similar type of freedom. And sure, maybe I saw things that I shouldn't have seen when I was like 12 and 13 years old, just from like websites like Rotten or something like that, where you just fucked up shit. But amongst teenagers back then, you always just share the most outrageous things and so on and so forth. But at the same time, it did, once again, I'm like, okay, I saw that, not gonna go to that. It didn't damage me, it didn't kind of, any residual effects. But it kind of, within the freedom that was allowed to play in, I explored and learned things and so on and so forth. And it seems to me that kind of the freedom to play, I guess, with the world to some extent, it is one of the key things that you want your child to have. No?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's a number of studies that kind of showcase actually children who play computer games have distinct advantage. It's not about limiting or preventing them from doing something, but like you said, you could only play in the yard. If you went outside the yard, I'm pretty certain you would have got very badly told off, right?
I think my boundaries where I could go, I think it was like a trust thing, right? The more I tested the boundaries, and therefore nothing happened. And I still comply with the rules that was given to me. They kind of, right? Let's increase the bubble.
Yeah, but you still have boundaries, right? You still
Yeah.
You still in terms of rules, right? And
Sure.
and those boundaries expanded as you got older and you became more mature. The problem with the internet is it is by and large unbounded, right?
Sure.
And you artificially, and there is no physical friction to be able to move. Like if you wanted to, when I was growing up, if I wanted to go and do something that was a bit dodgy, then there would be a whole bunch of physical friction to do it.
Sure.
Like, like police, there would have been, I would have had to go somewhere. I would have had to buy something. I would have been too young. There's a whole series of problems that I would have had to overcome, but that's not the case on the internet. There are no real tangible boundaries. And so you need to introduce these artificial ones. So, you've described a situation when you were young. You were given a set of boundaries, a set of rules that you had to adhere to, and if you broke those, then there would be consequences.
Yep.
And they were reasonably easy to enforce because they were physical. But in the internet, there aren't really those in the same way. Yes, there are parental controls, and for the very longest time, parental controls were terrible, but they are getting better. But it's about me being able to artificially set those boundaries because they're not physically present in the first place.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then it's not, you don't hand a 5-year-old everything that you would do an adult, right?
Absolutely.
Because they're just not ready for it. So it's about how do you take responsibility as a parent to provide a safe space for that child to learn and grow and push those boundaries. So my son's coming to me now and saying, "Oh, can I do this because of X, Y, and Z? I'm a bit older." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay. Let's talk about it. Let's see what it is, and let's move, let's move the gate back, or let's move the fence back a little bit more to give you more freedom because I trust that you are you're sensible to be able to start to make those types of decisions." But in the same way, is if you pushed the boundaries too much, went out, got completely hammered at age 14, drunk, came back, puked up all over the house. I'm pretty certain your mum and dad would have had a few stern words with you, right? So,
yes.
Yeah. So it's just like, you were a very naughty boy. I'm sure that's exactly how they would have phrased it. And in the same way, if I open up what my kids have access to, and they, I see them, suddenly looking at stuff on YouTube, which is completely inappropriate for them.
Sure.
Or I find, they're spending ages, they're not going to sleep. They're under the covers, like watching stuff. Then I'm like, right, well, the time limits come back in, or this comes back in because you've broken that trust. And
sure. Okay,
but you have to be able to understand that, and then you have to be able to reason with your kids about why those limits are there because of their protection at an appropriate age. So
that makes sense. What about the video games when it comes to like that? I mean, I'm just kind of curious because I know I never had those limits, but there's also internet was very different 2 decades ago when I was playing it. But for example, like Doom, I played it when I was 7 years old, and games that I definitely would be marked as for 18s old now, no problem, like GTA games, for example.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I'm pretty strict on games because there's a lot of work. There's been quite a lot of work around the impact of violence and violent video games, and not the kind of really the sort of the very right-wing populist. Oh, you've watched somebody kill somebody on a video game, so now you're going to go run out and kill loads of people. I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. But the kinds of attitudes and things that are there. That come through from watching different types of video games, different types of violence, and all these types of things. And that's that is an issue, right? And that's something that we do need to be aware of. And as a child, I don't think they're necessarily able to process, and some of the research shows this, that they're able to process some of this in the same way as an adult and be able to differentiate between the different things. So
could you give some more specific examples? I can't really put my finger on it.
Right. So you've got 8 or 9 year old playing Call of Duty, right? That's quite that can be, some people will say that's quite horrific visualization of going around shooting people, right? But for an 8-year-old, basically what that game is doing is encouraging an 8-year-old, say, I don't know why I've chosen 8, to participate in graphic violence against other people who they may also be talking to, right? And so there has been a series of studies to show that kind of learned behavior does have impact on people as they grow up. Not in that they are going to become psychopaths, although that's not.
So what kind of impact are we talking about?
Antisocial behavior, not being able to, not valuing other people. There's a whole bunch of things that it's been a long time since I looked at it, but there's also things about gambling. There's some studies to show a relationship between certain types of gameplay and an increase in gambling in adulthood. So there's potentially a bunch of side effects that perhaps society morally believes it's not necessarily a good thing. But equally, on the flip side, right? What would I'm just thinking about, what would I want my child to be doing? Right, when they're 8, 9, 10, 11, do I really want them to be sat in their bedroom talking to a bunch of strangers trying to kill each other, or would I prefer them to be building Lego, or would I prefer them to be outside, or would I be preferred to establishing a base set of behaviors, activities, knowledge about their own physicality, their own actual physical relationships within the physical relationships with individuals, or do I want them just to only be able to understand how to relate to people via video games? And for me, and it's a choice everybody has to make. For me, I kind of, maybe it's because I'm the first child and a Capricorn and all this type of stuff. I trust that there's a reason why the system has given it an age rating, right? These games, it's a 15 or an 18, right?
When it comes to age rating, I'm not exactly sure. I think it's also probably by some. Like in Lithuania, we have this term like super mommy, right? It's basically parents who are way over controlling over the child's life and just make it basically them living in a bubble by changing society to make the society as a bubble, which I think is a moronic way to do, because you need to be challenged to grow. You need to find the limits. You need to overcome them to be able to grow. Otherwise, you're always going to stay in a bubble and just basically rot over time. When it comes to video games, I think I think the most popular thing is like you see graphic killing, and thus it's not going to negatively impact you. I mean, I haven't read studies on this, so this is going to be just coming from my own opinion when it comes to. I played video games since I was 5, 6 years old, like with an increasing amount, especially during my teenage years. And obviously, I think the landscape has changed in numerous ways. I mean, first of all, just the graphic experience has increased drastically in the last decade. I mean, if you look at, I don't know, I guess Call of Duty is like one of the most popular games now, right? If you look at the Call of Duty 1 or 2 or 3, I mean, it is just day and night compared to what we have now. But at the same time, after growing up and evolving through video games, maybe because I'm looking from my own perspective, I don't really see the huge negative impacts. I mean, it definitely there were definitely a lot of positives coming out of it. Has it taken time, let's say, for me developing other things? Yeah, sure. I mean, I could have probably been more physically active when I was, especially in my teenage years. That could have given me a lot of potential benefits and so on. But at the same time, by playing video games, I learned shit tons about computers itself. Like, for example, there was this, maybe when I was, 12, 13, in Lithuania, there was this online game called Mew Online. It has like a version now, but it's kind of like a dungeon crawler type of MMORPG. And so it was on a huge way, it was very, very popular. And I remember I learned how could I make my own server? So I actually learned how to do SQL coding. I learned how to basically set up the server. I ran the server for a couple of weeks. I learned a bit of basically that's where I got my first introduction to cybersecurity, because people were hacking into the server and just making cheats and that kind of stuff. So I tried to see how this exploit is done, how things can be changed. And obviously I was very, very raw at this, but learned tons of it. And then I just kind of kept going forward. Like, sure, I mean, a lot of the time was playing video games, but then I think there was a very tangible positive outcomes that came as a consequence. And yeah, so I guess what I'm leaning to is like, I think probably research when it comes to video games and various correlations, it's maybe at a bit of an early stage to make clear recommendations. I think you have to be conscious of various effects it has. And I think what you said is very, very spot on. It's like you have to think, well, how do you want to spend your time, right? I mean, because you can think about like living in a virtual world and let's say, leveling up your character or grinding for some sort of new sword or whatever. But you have to like detach from that digital side. Look what's in the real world. You're sitting on a couch for 6 hours straight, right? You haven't drank any water. You're dehydrated most likely. You've physically have been deteriorating over time and all these kind of effects. And I think when it comes to the right balance, it can definitely be a useful tool. But I think it is just more about being conscious of how you use it. I think kind of leading to that.
I mean, like, so don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that video games are bad, right? And it's the same as saying media, films, TV is
Sure.
all bad. It's not all bad. It's perhaps inappropriate. I think it's inappropriate to introduce it at the wrong time to a child. But there are a couple of things that also need to pick up on there. One, the prevalence of and type of computer game that we have now that young children are being introduced to is very different to
yes, hugely.
Right, and the balance is very different. Like I suspect you are able to make decisions about gaming and what the gaming experience is to you because you have like me, a grounded reality in going out and building dens and doing, in a world where computer games weren't so prevalent, right?
Sure.
And where the internet wasn't so prevalent. I grew up, I get like you, I grew up, learning about computers by playing games and then wanting to create the games and then, programming them. But that is not the experience of children, right? Because from my experience, like from looking back at my experience and seeing where my son is, the ability for me to develop a game which was similar to the games I was playing is like here.
Yeah.
And it was just me, right? And if you look at some of the early games, it's a very small team of developers. And then you look at Call of Duty,
Sure.
right? And the ability for my son to develop a game of the quality of Call of Duty and all the other bits and pieces that sit around it, right? Actually, now I would argue that when we started out with computer games, we were much more participatory in them, less consumption of them. Right?
Yeah.
And I think it is, computer games are now a consumer item, much more than they ever were. Kids buy them, play them, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
It's entertainment to them.
Sure.
It was entertainment to us, but it was also in some ways more than that because it was about the technology and understanding the technology and the way that it worked. But they because it's now so commonplace, the point we made earlier, they don't need to think about that.
Yeah.
They don't really, it's just there, right? They don't need to think about how the PlayStation works. They don't need to think about the actual architecture that sits underneath it. That's just not, they just plug it in and away it goes. We've made it so easy for them. Whereas if we wanted to play a multiplayer game, we had to learn how modems work. We had to find the right thing. We had to, fire it up, and it didn't quite work because the thing that we downloaded didn't quite work. So then we had to write a new bit of script and make that work. And, it's not the utility. It's a utility now. It wasn't the utility that it is now.
Which probably like you used to hear same arguments when it comes to cars. I would assume like probably the 60s to 80s when like cars, I think cars now much more, at least in my generation, at least I think about it, it's much more utility. And I mean, I have basic understanding how it works, but I couldn't fix shit if you asked me, right, type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, I couldn't afford a decent car, so I bought 2 crap ones, took the engine out of one, and put it in the good body of another one, right?
Yeah,
So I learned loads.
Yeah.
And just the prevalence of it. I look at pictures of like where I grew up and the location that I grew up, and there's like 2 or 3 cars.
Yeah.
Right. And I go home now to my mum and dad's, and you can't see any of the curbs because it's all cars, right?
Exactly.
And it's kind of the same thing, and the prevalence of the technology means that you don't need to worry about how it works underneath the hood, and the cheapness of the technology means that by and large, if it breaks, you buy a new one, and it doesn't really or you complain until it whereas I get technology, it's like, well, it doesn't work, well, fix it yourself, or you need to do this, you need to do that, right?
Something just banging it on the side doesn't help. Then you're just like, crap.
So have you turned it off and on again?
Yeah.
But I think it I get back to the original point about parenting in a digital age. I mean, one of my colleagues at the university, Professor Corinne May Chahal, talks about cyborg childhood and the impact that it has, and this idea that children these days are not distinct from their technology. They're forming this one thing, and she's got some really interesting work in this space about thinking about the impact of technology on children. But it's my fundamentally it's my responsibility as a parent to protect my child, and instill in them the values that I think are important, right? And
I think the only issue here, if I may interject for a sec, is like, I think this is like one of the generations, like exactly, since we're living in a revolution, like a new age has dawned on us, right? Information age. We cannot make a educated prediction that the advice we're giving on the children who are going to live in the new age is going to be correct. I mean, because we're basing it on the previous age, right? And obviously, I think the intent to protect it and prepare them for the real world is correct, and that's what you want to do. But I think because we have no idea what the new age is going to look like, it's the children who are going to mold it, and especially those who now were born where their whole life internet existed, their whole life Netflix existed, or whatever. This is where that discrepancy bit comes, that the advice we had or things we learned is not necessarily going to be applicable to them.
I think good advice is good advice regardless, right?
Sure.
And really, maybe I'm old, but I think building a society on the a focused ability to be able to play Call of Duty well. I'm picking on Call of Duty. I apologize to Call of Duty fiends, but
no, fuck them.
But being able to build a society based on your ability to play Call of Duty really well is probably not one that is going to be massively successful. So I just like I say, there's lots of also positive research that shows that children who play video games have increased abilities over and above their peers, and in certain like things like reaction times, and certain understanding, certain physicality, spatial awareness, other bits and pieces like this. So I'm not saying I'm not saying that children shouldn't be playing video games. Far from it. All I'm saying is
has to be controlled.
You wouldn't show an 8-year-old an R-rated movie. Well, I don't think a responsible parent should show a child an R-rated movie, right? So, and if we as a society, or the people we put in charge of selecting video games, so we have quite a strict PEGI rating, says that this video game is the equivalent of an R-rated movie, and shouldn't be shown to but that's why we have parental choice as well. So as a parent, if you feel that's appropriate, then you can go away and do that. I don't feel that's appropriate.
No, that's fair enough. I think
and there are plenty. I mean, it's not like there is a shortage of games for them to go and play, right?
Oh, it's insane. I think part of this that is probably joined a bit about responsibility for companies when it comes to cybersecurity, but I think it's the psychological exploitation, especially when it comes to video games. I mean, so this is something I've also been looking into a bit more in the last few years. But just like about just general gamification methodologies and various structures that's being used for either obviously for video games or any other tools, especially like online universities and so on. And that is a scary dark corner of the world as far as I'm concerned. Because I mean, a lot of marketing side of video games and a lot of the exploitative, purely psychological manipulation and exploitative mechanisms that are ingrained into the game. And it's beautifully scientifically done to optimize this for that exact purpose. But with this goal basically so that the user will play the game for as long as possible or pay the most money with microtransactions or any other methodology you can take into account. I think this is like where the evil is from the kind of societal good side of things, because it's one of those areas that nobody really thinks about or talks about. They kind of, obviously you have those extreme cases where here were like somebody who played the game for like 60 hours a day died from something or whatever. Where there obviously that mechanism of psychologically leeching off the person just went overboard. But at the same time, I mean, even if I just like compare how games are now and how games were 20 years ago, that side of things of like how they hook on you, how they keep you interested in, and like the whole quest mechanisms or any other like mechanism they employ, I think it stepped over the psychological manipulation boundary ages ago, and it just keeps going and diving harder. And there's some backlash from time to time, but I think the goalposts are so stretched out that and the lack of communication or conversation happening on this topic, that the trend seems to be just going to be keep going and going and going until even worse cases. And I'm especially scared about this because my prediction is that VR is going to be the next video game or video environment evolution of technology, and people are going to be basically just living there. And so you combine that with huge psychologically addictive methodologies and tools that are already exploited and keep being developed to, and then grab that attention for even 1 second longer, that's already huge profits. Man, that is a scary fucking world. That's like, if you think about, I don't know, there's this movie where like a lot of people just like basically living in their VR world, it's all beautiful and
Ready Player One.
Yes, yeah. While in reality, it is just sad as hell and just all trash and everybody's basically living in a junkyard. That dystopian future, I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I see it's in the plausibility realm. I think that's where kind of my impression is, at least at this point.
Yeah, I mean, so I agree with you. The manipulative, it's so easy to develop manipulative, targeted individual interactions using digital technology, and that is a really big concern.
Yeah.
But again, it comes back to our conversation. The incentives are for the company to make money.
Yep.
There is no regulation, and nobody sees that nobody really sees the problem with it. But what concerns me a little bit more is we have a frame of reference which enables us to resist that.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah,
because we've had other experience.
Yeah.
But what happens in the next generation, where the majority of their existence, they've had this type of manipulation as by default, and they accept it by default, right? So there are bigger things. I mean, Ready Player One, this whole embedded VR thing. There's did you ever watch Red Dwarf when you were in the? Do you have Red Dwarf?
No. I know of it because of ads. I don't think maybe I've seen one episode. Yeah.
Yeah. So Red Dwarf was a big sci-fi comedy program in the UK. And there were a couple of books that span out of it, and one of the books ended up as kind of a weird symbiosis as a TV episode. But in there, I think the game, they like exactly what you described, like Life, and it's called. They have a VR game called Life, and in the book, they basically, the book starts out like they've achieved certain things, and it's all going very well. But then like they sort of cuts back and they realize that actually they've been playing the game for God knows how long, because it's so seductive to be in it, and their bodies are dying and withering away. I mean, that's like an ultimate ultimate kind of endpoint for this, but you know, we grew up with escapism through films. Like we were able to watch movies, and you know, we were able to escape into the fantasies that we were provided there. You know, and in some ways, you know, goddamn Hollywood lied to us. We're never going to be the hero of our own story. But you know, we all grew up wanting to be Indiana Jones, you know, Neo from the Matrix, all these superheroes we saw. But you know, that's not really where the entertainment is these days. You know, like you say, you know, for a lot of my kids, a lot of the time, my kids, their entertainment is participatory entertainment, where they're in control of aspects of the story, which is something that I've not really experienced, and I don't really have a strong frame of reference for. You know, and so actually I find it sometimes quite difficult to get my kids to watch movies or watch TV, because they're not that interested in it, because they don't have a participatory role to guide the story or understand it. So it's quite interesting to kind of see that and see how that's impacting them and their childhood, and what it means to the stories that they participate in, and their escapism. I mean, there was I can't remember what it was. I was reading, it was a long time ago, but I was reading a paper around online gaming, particularly around World of Warcraft. Yeah. And a surprisingly high percentage of men played as women.
Yes.
Like over 50% or something. And it, you know, it's this idea of complete escapism, where you can be somebody else, something else, within this story, and that's very seductive, I think. You know, particularly if your worldview is rubbish, and then for a few £100 you can actually, you know, be a hero. Yeah. You know, and our life is absolutely rubbish. Why would you not want to be in that all the time, like you say?
Yeah, and I guess it probably, I mean, this is just purely speculation, guesswork on my end, but I would expect that people who exactly do not have their own identity defined are the most susceptible to this, because like building yourself as a human and building your own character and building emotional intelligence and, you know, really like knowledge intelligence, it's a very lengthy and difficult process, and it's filled with failure and everything. And in video games, it's kind of that process, just more rewarding. You have like you know, confetti throwing at you and like beautiful lights showing, yeah, well done, you great job, you did this, and you see progress, you feel it. I mean, I'm talking because I've fallen into those traps many times, especially in like low points in life, like when you just feel like emotionally drained and you just feel like you're stuck, you can't do shit. You realize, instinctively, then I used to like dive into some MMORPG game, and I realized, you know, spend like 30 days on it, just playing for like, you know, 14 hours a day. And then, you know, you escape from that because you just rested, your brain eventually kind of grew back, and you think, wow, I just spent like 36 hours on this. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. You're always looking for that next endorphin hit to help make you feel better, right?
But so, I mean, I always stepped out of that. And then I started really thinking how, like, what are the reasons why I sometimes fall into these holes? And I think it was exactly that in real life, I didn't know how to proceed forward. And there I could do that. And that helped me just... It's kind of probably like a form of like a psychological crutch to some extent. It's kind of like where you're such a dump, and instead of just kind of listening to the clock tick for every second until you have no idea what to do, you have no control, there you have some of it, and then you allow this time to speed. And I think this also means the cliched phrase that time is a healer, right? And this kind of helps to also forward that process of the time to eventually your own, like whether it's physical body, whether it's your mental body, to recover, if you manage to utilize that in that form, I think.
Yeah, and if it's not your kind of your prevalent thing, right? So you know, we grew up with games not being prevalent, right? So we always knew where we had to be because it wasn't the default mode, and you know, I just a little bit concerned that, the dependency, and it kind of comes back to what we were talking about at the start, the dependency that children growing up now will have on games to define themselves as individuals. And I'm not massively keen on that, because I think children should be able to define themselves, independently. They need to be able to know who they are without being able to relate to a high scoreboard. And I don't disagree that actually doing these types of activities can be quite cathartic, because you can the focusing on something else which isn't directly related to your problem can really help you think about that problem in a different way, or free your mind. And I do that even when I'm working. If I have a number of other hobbies like Lindy Hop, and such, when we can dance, but I also make loads of stuff, and this idea that actually taking that time to do something else, whether that's virtual in a game or something that's tangible in terms of making something, then bit of furniture or whatever it might be, then you can it gives your brain some different stimulus that the next day you wake up and you've solved the problem without even realizing it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm, like I say, I'm not downer on computer games. I think they're really important. I think they're really important for modern society, but I think there are, like the cybersecurity conversations, I think they are not free of malice and poor incentives. And so you, as a parent, I think you just need to be a bit more wary, skeptical of the crap that's being sold, and specifically sold to your kids as well, and then have the ability to say no, right? You are an adult, and you are the parent, and part of being a parent is not to make your child happy all the time.
Absolutely, because you have to have that. And to add to that, I think this really reminded me of a couple of podcasts ago. I had one of my brothers, and he diagnosed himself as a video game addict, because he really took over, and we had a very good discussion about this. And one of the key things he said is that I realized, he compared other people, and they had other things to do in life besides video game, and to him that felt unnatural, and that's where the first red flag flared up. It was like, why do I think that for other people to do something besides video gaming is a bad thing? And it's like, maybe I'm the one who's wrong here, right? Yeah. And then it kind of started changing that. And I think maybe this is one of the reasons maybe I never dove into it in too much of a deep end, because I always had other activities. Like I always had either basketball, I always had music school that I had to go to. Video games still there, but obviously when I was growing up, you had the family farms that you had to work on over the weekends and other times. And so the video game was it was a bit of a small reward at the end of the day. So you spend still an hour or something, or maybe not necessarily playing, but or on Skype or whatever it was back then. But my day percentage-wise was still maybe 5-10% left for that, for this specific topic. And maybe that's why it helped me balance things out a bit, and always have that need to have other activities. Because there were plenty of points in my life where I had the freedom just literally play video games 24 hours a day and nobody would care, right? Fantastic. But it never succeeded, despite how in some cases you feel like, oh, that's exactly what I would want. I think I realized I just want a vacation, and that's what it means. Because I need an outlet, creative outlet, for like Lindy Hop was perfect for this. There's a physical and a creative and a social outlet, brilliant. Martial arts was perfect for that. My bass guitar is a fantastic thing for that, because it's also very creative, it's also very technical. You can dive into this, very meditative in a lot of ways. And all these other hobbies, I definitely find I must have them in life to feel whole. Otherwise, there's just a huge gap that, makes me feel depressed. Even if I don't have another side of that, for example, if I just have 9 to 5 and I have my evenings open, which a lot of people are oh my God, this is the best thing ever. That is so not enough for me. I have to have 12 to 14 hour days that I feel I'm actually utilizing my life. I'm actually doing things, progressing, I'm building, I'm learning, or whatever. And if I don't have that over time, you just feel low. I just feel depressed. And the only solution that is exactly just to take more things until sometimes you overshoot it. And then, but that's, at least for myself, that's the only way forward.
Yeah, and I think my concern is as you said, that even your brother identifying themselves as a video game addict, because it was unusual because of the experiences he had when he grew up. And you're saying you had all these other experiences, so you can compare and contrast it. But what if you're basically the majority of your experience is not being outside, not doing all this stuff, right. But it is online, it is computers, it is watching TV or watching YouTube or whatever it is. You have, the difference between playing games and playing basketball is stark, right? In terms of if you haven't got that ability, haven't got that knowledge, haven't got that experience, then how do you be able to go, this is an unhealthy activity? I mean, one of the I'm sure I read this somewhere, but or I might have just dreamt it, but
which is as legit source as anything.
Well, it's as good as some politicians. Anyway, I think the two biggest addictions on the rise are porn addiction and video game addiction. Right, and they're primarily there because both of them, like you say, for video games, it's really about driving that endorphin hit all the time. And both arguably are having massive impacts on relationships and society.
Absolutely, and I mean, my probably like semi-universal solution to any of these addictions is exactly being a stronger individual. I think even just coming back to exactly what we talked at the very beginning in the relationships. But I mean, if you think about relationship to yourself as a relationship, right, then you also need to have a strong individual, a strong character, a strong identity that is able to look at yourself and think about why am I doing some things? Am I happy with the things I feel I want to do, with the impulses I get, right? And I remember, like, I had this conversation with a friend of mine, and we're just talking about these kind of impulses, urges you get, like, whether sexual urges, that kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's an interesting topic. Let's go. And so he thought about this quite a lot, and he wants to kind of present his thinking to me and just have a discussion. I was like, yeah, bring it on. And his outcome was like, well, because I feel these urges, that means they're legit, so I need to satisfy them. I was like, maybe, but have you thought where they come from? And they're like, well, they're just there. I was like, that's not enough. Like, I mean, at least my current thinking is that, sure, you have emotions, you have impulses, but they all have a source. It's not easy to find a source, but it is possible. I mean, that's what psychiatrists and psychologists help you to do that if you cannot have yourself. But if you can, that is way better, I think. Because, I mean, I know I myself have various triggers in life, whether it's like somebody saying something or you seeing something, and you have a negative emotion building up to you. And over a long period of time, by analyzing myself, I was able to identify what the triggers are. And once you're able to identify, it's kind of like cognitive behavioral therapy. You can change the trigger, and then it's gone, and the whole impulse and the whole chain just disappears of the action and reaction. And I was like, that's fascinating, which means then there's way more control of myself I can exude and take over than I thought. Because, especially as a teenager, you used to think, oh, I feel this because blah, 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 and it just has to be like that. No, it doesn't. Like, you just need to mature, you need to grow, you need to learn this skill of identifying what you feel, where it comes from if you can, because that's like a whole new level of game. And the whole even third level of game is like, if you can change that. It's like, it's hard, but the benefits of that are immense. And I was then coming back to just speaking with a friend. I'm like, okay, so then let's analyze where they come from, right? And we try to have this conversation, and I realize not only it's one of those things where, like, since he hasn't thought through it and he hasn't analyzed his own behavior and where the sources of those impulses come from, I mean, I could help him kind of guide a bit deeper in that analysis process, but I couldn't come even close to the source, because when you hear the arguments and you follow the arguments that the other person is making in those situations, after 2 or 3 levels of the 2 questions of why this, why that, where the source of that comes from, they start looping themselves, right? It becomes self-sustaining as an argument, and then realize, okay, we hit the wall, and it's a shame, but I mean, we can, like, next time you can do things. And where was I going with all this?
I don't know.
Yeah.
We can cut it out in the edit. It's fine.
No. This is all part of it. I guess, yeah. So when it comes to stronger individuals, so even if you can analyze your sexual urges and where they come from, right? And they can be tied to very fascinating, like childhood memories or instances or whatever it is. But if you can understand them, I think you can change them. And then there's a consequence. If we think about porn addiction or if we think video game addiction, it's the same kind of thing. Is that if you are a strong individual and if you can actually take control as much as it is possible of your own life and seek to do so, like seek to be proactive in your decision making, in knowing why you want to do things, or actually being able to choose if you want to do or act upon those urges, then I think this problem, it becomes solvable. And I think it's like, as a lot of things to talk about, and probably we can move on and talk about COVID for exactly this point. It's like, how do you solve this issue? Is it top down or bottom up, right? Top down would be like the government or the society choosing what you must do, or the bottom up with the individual taking the responsibility and acting upon the rest. And the more I think about this, either COVID or any kind of things, it has to, like, the individual must take the responsibility for themselves and people around them. Like, that is the only way forward. Because I don't know how it is now in UK, but like in Lithuania, the situation is getting from bad to worse daily. Like, I think as of yesterday, we were the #1 country in the world by the number of cases per 100,000 people, like new cases. So we dominate this job. I was like, for fuck's sake, how do you manage to get there?
Well, we were beating you for a while, I think.
Yeah, but it seems like UK have handled this much better than Lithuania has. And the problem is, I mean, a lot of people, use those arguments like, fuck you, like, my government never did shit to me, I'll do whatever they want, like, and just blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, but you're completely ignoring the rest of the responsibility you should be taking now. And strangely, I think one of the issues here, you know what? The word pandemic has no weight behind it now. It has been used so much that pandemic, what it actually means, by the description of it, means fuck all these days. It's like if somebody said tic tacs and pandemic in the same sentence, it'd be like, they have as much weight as a word. Yeah. And yeah, so
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just like go back to the thing that, TV was, well, I can't remember who's described it, but TV was described as the opiate of a nation, right? And by analogy, I think computer games are the motherfucking crack of that type of entertainment drug. Because they are specifically designed to engage and drive you forward. They are designed to be addictive, and to do in some ways. I just don't. My concern is that kids these days maybe don't have the same or the right sets of tools to be able to deal with the modern world in the same way. Being able to define. We had trusted sources of information. You're talking about the pandemic. People are getting news from the internet and they're trusting it. Fake news, whatever. How did children? Children used to be able to trust newspapers. They used to be able to trust magazines. They used to be able to trust TV. And now you can go on YouTube to find any version of the truth you want. And when you talk about the kind of the social good, what happens when you basically can go and find anybody who wants to reinforce your opinion that you can, right? I could go online and probably find a community that firmly believes that COVID was created by a monkey pig hybrid somewhere, probably generated in a lab in the South China Seas or something.
It comes from the head of the pig that James Cameron, or whatever his name is, David Cameron fucked.
James Cameron is somebody else. They definitely sue you. James Cameron definitely. So there's a whole. I just. So then what happens when you can have this, in some ways, like group of people that can reinforce each other's opinions. But then also, one of the things I've spoken about is this idea that without the internet, diasporas used to have to integrate into the society, right? So like, you came to the UK, you integrated in the UK, but by and large, you didn't have to, right? You could have still maintained a significant link to your culture, your society back at home through the technology we have. And in actual fact, you see increasingly diasporas hardly integrating because they are primarily maintaining their links, their language, their culture from back home. And that's that doesn't add to the development of the culture that the places they're moving into. But what happens when you have these boundaries being created, and it worries me that without the need to integrate when you move, without the need to integrate your ideas, without the need to challenge your ideas, because you can always go back to where, virtually back to where you came from, or you can always go and find the like-minded individuals, or you just have to go online and the algorithms will find the like-minded individuals for you. That creates, everybody talks about echo chambers, and it creates the echo chambers, but then you have the plurality of echo chambers, and they don't have to integrate. You don't have to have the challenge. You don't have to, you don't, and then you get this, ultimately this sense of individualism that, potentially overrides the benefits of working in a community, right? Not everybody is you're all individual, but you need to, we're societal animals, right? We can't exist without one another, right? We can't exist as a species if we don't engage with another human being, right? Fundamentally, we can't breed unless we meet somebody else, right? So we have to form societies, and we have to move those societies forward. Otherwise they die out. And I just see the kind of extreme events that are driving the internet sometimes worries me, that the impact it will have on society and the social good, and the range of impacts and the range of ways people have responded, blaming other groups, this, that, and the other. It's just in some ways crazy, maybe it's just the way that I brought up, but I'm like, how can I help people? How can I, how can we make this situation better for the people I care about, and some of the, the people I don't know. So, and if I could, sorry, I was gonna say, the world's tough, right? And if me just being polite, going back to being polite and British, just says thank you, send somebody a Christmas card, whatever it is, and that just helps them get through what is ultimately an incredibly shitty situation for everybody. Then why wouldn't we want to do that? But sometimes I find that potentially I'm on my own.
I think you watch Parks and Recreation, right?
No, I haven't actually.
Okay, so there's a fantastic character, Ron Swanson, and there has this one of the quotes where it's like, if I had a choice to do something or do nothing, I will always do nothing. But if I have a choice to help others do nothing by doing something, I will always take that. Right? Beautiful thing. But I think, like, if you inverse that, I think that's what it is by societal good. I think so. I was thinking quite a lot about this idea of, like, exactly what you said, like individualism and exploitation and just those echo chambers. And I think. Obviously, you've done computer simulations, right, in the past. And if you do any computer simulation, like what you have, first of all, your errors are huge, but the systems are stabilizing over time, right? And I think humans and the societies work in exactly the same fashion. Like, after every new reform, every new revolution, or like how we have new age happening, or new technology that changes drastically the whole landscape, you have this exactly just massive oscillation moving from like one extreme to another, like the whole system's trying to stabilize itself. And so you have, once again, people who exploit it for various selfish gains, power gains, financial gains, whatever it is. And you have you have the extreme right, you have the extreme left coming in, and everything's like that. Like, I think if you take public discourse and probably compared to 4 or 5 years ago, it was way more extreme in terms of linguistics in some cases than it is now. So I mean, at least I started seeing those oscillations. They're still there, but they started narrowing down. For at least I think basically from 2014 to 2018, there was huge swings. I'm not saying there aren't any now, but yeah, just the scope of it slightly moves differently. And so if I take that assumption that the internet is a new age revolution, and the way I look at it is that this is the first time in the history of humanity that the whole planet, a whole species of humans, is sitting at one table and talking to each other, right? And we have hundreds of thousands of years of development in all the different branches. And now we're finally unifying again. And internet allows that. And it's obvious that you will have these huge oscillations. You will have these huge cultural clashes, linguistical clashes, perspective clashes. Yeah, and it's fine. And I mean, I'm fine in the sense that I can understand why it happens, and it's necessity for the system to stabilize to happen. And so everything we see now, those echo chambers, those bubbles, those ideas of people who just want to stick to what they know rather than challenge themselves and think about the things they don't know, or maybe there's more objective reality or more objective truth than what is being given to them. It's a natural consequence of this. And so if that's the case, then at least my prediction is that over the next decade or 2 decades, the system is going to stabilize and some reasonable guidance going to come out. And maybe this is my optimist talking, but given that humanity so far hasn't killed itself, even though it, especially in the last 50 years, had all the weapons to do so, I think what's going to come out of it is a much more unified world. I do hope that's going to be the case. And then kind of leading to that is once again probably just reiterating the whole notion that, well, if you have individualism coming about, yeah, you have to start challenging that. And I think that this is probably where the idea of the critical thinking comes from. It's like, challenge, is the news source legit? Is it basically the level of, well, Peter told me that, or is it actually been studied? Has somebody actually looked into it? Has the person who said that information been there and saw things or whatever? Which is, I think it's one of those things alongside cybersecurity that should be taught and trained as early on in schools and primary schools, probably even start planting those seeds, because the objectivity will help you just to move in life more reliably, and then just less conflict is going to happen because you no longer have clashes of opinion, but you have a commonly seeking objectiveness and objective truth and objective reality, and that common ground I think helps. Because I think the other assumption that I always have here is that if a human doesn't know anything, like basically if I have zero information about a specific thing, if somebody tells me something, since I have nothing to compare to, I assume that the first information I receive is the truth. It might not be, but I assume, because it's better than not knowing anything. Because I think humans psychologically, we are afraid of unknown, and thus we'll take anything to at least plug that unknown at the first level. But then the problem is, since you have that plug, the first one, even though it's rotten, it's incorrect, and it's complete falsehood, now replacing that challenges you to open up the unknown again, to change it and analyze it. And since you're scared of that, you're really going to fight until that new information, even though it might be more objectively correct, for you to swap those things. So if they take that into account, then this once again explains to me the whole idea of echo chambers, because a lot of people are just regurgitating things they heard, right? Or their level of arguments is exactly just my papa told me, even though papa never fucking know where this comes from or anything like that. And then the lack of that, any critical analysis, and the desire not to open up the unknown in their minds again, forces them to really fight for that. And that's fine. I think this is the process you have to do. And I think this is like a growing up and maturing process that everybody should go through, and eventually challenge themselves to the extent that they actually know why they know things that they know. And it's a big task. And I mean, I'm still doing that. But in the last decade that I've been actively working on this, it helped my life drastically. And at least now I start identifying things I know that I don't know, which is an immensely better state to be in than not knowing what you don't know. Right? So that makes sense. So coming back to the society, I think this is exactly what you have. So on top of having different cultural backgrounds, different ideological backgrounds, take all these factors, you have another biggest flaw. You have people at different maturity levels in exactly the point I was talking about now. And here you cannot have a discussion, because there's one side who is defending their single thread of knowledge, which is hiding their unknown, and the other side trying to look for something more objective. It's probably similar. The most obvious parallel would be a rational thinker trying to have a discussion about religion with a religious fanatic, right? You have no logic there. You have no way to have a discussion because one side is trying to use logic, other is just spouting the fanaticism. And so you have, I think, these parameters that in public discourse, that's where you have this friction, you have these extremes coming out. That's where very commonly it feels that nobody can talk to each other because everybody just monologuing, right? Everybody just their desire is just to express their opinion rather than actually look for something a bit deeper or a bit more objective or a bit more closer to the truth, because that's not what this is about. And then having all these assumptions, and I mean, this is like a big spider web of assumptions, at least the way I think about this problem. Then it explains to me, at least to some extent, or it gives me an understanding. When it comes to COVID, when it comes to a fucking global pandemic, even don't take a global pandemic. Take your city, take your town that you live in. Take your immediate surrounding. Even within that, you cannot take the responsibility for others who are around you. Like, that is moronic. You don't even have to think about the greater society, right? But I mean, even just at that level, your individuality is so big that you must only think about yourself. And if you were thinking from the sense that, well, I have no idea how to do that, I have no idea what to do, because once again, coming back to the idea of the unknown, then the people try to do something they know and just take the first information they got, and typically the first information they got was from a guy called John who said, well, government is bullshit and it's all just a lie, right? And then you're stuck with that.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying there is really something I kind of believe in, and as we would expect, we're both scientists. What we should be teaching is critical thinking, scientific thought in schools as a default, rather than what really most schools are set up to do, which is to teach children to follow and respect authority, and follow it blindly. So that's one of the things I think will be important going forward, is to be a healthy level of skepticism, I think.
Yes.
But the flip side of that is, if you've got people who only know how to challenge, then you have the other side who go, well, show me the evidence for why we should do this in the lockdown. I don't believe the evidence, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to do, there potentially is times when, the building is burning and somebody's saying, get out of the building, right? Sure. And you need to be able to follow orders. So there is always a tension. And that's one of the things that we have in the UK at the moment, in that we are permitted to go and see family over the 5 days of Christmas, but we're being advised against it.
Right. In Lithuania, we have now basically, in different counties would be equivalent, at the borders or where you would drive in the counties, we have police blockages. Right. And so the police are now basically, you have to show, not all of them, but some of them, you have to show physical evidence, like a paperwork that you live there or that kind of stuff, for you to enter there. Or some cities as well. I mean, so for Christmas, it's going to be the same thing. Just because things just got out of control and people just bullshitting. And the funniest thing, funny in a tragic comedic way, there are now, I've seen, I don't know whether it's legit or not, but I've seen some posts about people offering a service of smuggling you to the county you need for like a normative price. I was like, for fuck's sake, really? Even now?
Yeah, well,
Jesus.
there's a need and there's a demand, so people are going to supply, right? And
precisely right.
Again, sort of, we've had the security economics conversation, but again, a lot of economists have looked at this type of stuff, public goods and behavioral economics is an area of this exact type of study of how people behave with scarce resources and the choices, basically the choice and decision theory that they have describes people's behavior, or attempts to describe people's behavior, and it's an interesting area. I'm interested in terms of the research that I do around individual decisions that people make, for the way I articulate it is, and it's related to COVID, right? So, you have a finite resource. How do you allocate that resource to protect the organization you work in terms of buying cybersecurity rather than investing it in the company to grow? In this case, like you have a finite resource in terms of what you can and can't do. How do you invest your time to protect yourself and your family and society, or do you spend it in a different way to because you want to go to the shops or the cinema? So,
Sure.
There's this kind of the decision making in the presence of risk is quite an interesting
Absolutely.
area because fundamentally some people don't believe it's a risk, right?
Yeah, and I think it really comes to this also idea that especially in Western Europe, the vast majority of people are living in abundance type of mentality and abundance type of society, and for a number of them probably this is the first time they are faced with scarcity, exactly. And I know, I mean, this is also another idea and topic I thought quite deeply since moving back to Lithuania, because so like my parent generation, people like in their 40s, 50s, I mean, they grew up in Soviet Union, right? So that was definitely a scarcity type of environment, not for everybody, but for definitely, I would say probably majority of the society. And so, and like my generation and younger, we were brought up in this kind of move from scarcity to abundance, but I think as a mentality, we have more abundance type of society mentality. And the funniest thing, I was thinking about this, and this came to like a big realization, and I think it's correct after thinking about it a lot, is that now on top of generational differences between, like my parents and now, you have a very different perspective of how the world works because of scarcity and abundance. And it means any discussion you have or any problem you're trying to solve, there's an inevitable conflict you're going to have. And I remember this realization came to me when I was driving in a car, and Ausha was speaking to her mother, and there was like a simple thing, like Ausha asked her mother to buy a toothpaste or something. And over the simple thing, I wouldn't say conflict, but there was like a mini dispute came about, which you think, well, there shouldn't be any, right? Either you can or you can't. But that just coincidentally really coincided with what I was thinking at the moment, is that, so when you're faced with a problem, a person from scarcity mentality, the first mode of solution is, we'll get by. I'll just put something together, I'll craft something together, I'll, salvage some things, and I'm going to get by. I will, and I'll make it work in some way, in patchwork style. Because that's what scarcity demands. Like, you have very finite resources and you better reuse the resources you have, right? From abundance mentality, you have, well, I need this, and then my first solution, well, if you can't get it, I'll go somewhere else to get it, because it's there, right? It's abundance. And without appreciating this, or people thinking about this, then, because people assume the other person comes from the same mentality, you have these minor conflicts out of nowhere, and sometimes they do escalate. But just because the people's offering solutions, which to them they are correct, but the person thinking from the other side, they're like, why the fuck would you think this, right? So from the person from the abundance who's like, go and pick up a toothpaste, they're like, oh, it's fine, we're going to have something similar at home. And I was like, no, I need this. No, that's fine. It's like, the fuck, it's a simple task. But that's exactly right. But the underlying reason is not that the person can or cannot. I think it definitely lies in just that scarcity and abundance and how different they are. And so if you think that, and then think once again, come to the society. And I think this is then an additional layer, especially with COVID. Yes, a lot of people are now faced with scarcity for the first time, and they have no idea how to put themselves into those shoes and that mentality and that decision-making process, and how to deal and how to operate in a scarcity-based society and environment.
Yeah, no, I mean, when I was growing up, my parents had, my dad, well, it's a classic kind of family. My dad was the main breadwinner. He lost his job, went through some really hard times. And then from that, you kind of, you do mend your socks. You do, you do make sure you eke out everything out of the things you have, because you can't afford to do anything other than that. Yes. And I learned a hell of a lot from it. So, know, it's like, so we're talking about getting a bit of furniture in the house, and like Sarah was showing me the pictures if she wanted, and it's like, £600-700, and I'm like, yeah, I could buy that, but I don't want to spend that much money
Sure.
on it. I could, because I know I can make it for like
50 quid.
50 quid, right? So we went and we bought the stuff, and I made it, right? And
Fantastic.
and I feel very privileged to have learnt those skills from my dad, and but also to have that mindset that, to have a go. I mean, the other thing as well, I think it's interesting. One of the things I feel very lucky to have is to not have any inhibitions about being able to be creative and make something.
I fail, if anything.
I mean, I feel like I've got, I've got enough skills, and I've grown those skills, and I've developed those skills to be able to manufacture and build things, and within the tools that I have, and I feel lucky to have a set of tools that I've got, or I've bought, or I've inherited, which enable me to do more. The better tools you have, the more the better things you can make, all that type of stuff. But one of the things that I hope I've passed on to my kids is, you can make it. Right, like don't just sit there and go, oh no, I can't do that. Like, we'll just buy it. Just go, actually, you can do this, right? Over the summer, my son, got really into cycling, and my oldest son got really into cycling, and he was, I want a rolling road. So we just built a rolling road. We got some tube, we 3D printed some stuff, we put some, I mean, it didn't work very well, but we did it, and he learned a whole load of stuff from doing it. He learned about different types of bearings. He learned about some manufacturing, and we just kind of threw something together, and it worked for a little bit, and then it didn't work, and we learned, we worked why it didn't work. But that I see. So sometimes I think the way you described it as the kind of the abundance versus scarcity, the necessity is the mother of invention is a phrase that we have over here, right? And it's I want to pass that on to my kids, even though they are in a post-scarcity environment because of my socio-economic position.
Sure.
They can go and get pretty much whatever they want, right? My son's particularly good with money. He saves, and which is good, and he buys the things he wants. But it does mean he's got, his family, is reasonably in a good position, so he gets lots of nice things. So he doesn't really have to want for anything. So his ability to just go, well, actually, I'll go and make it, and he does. Like, he goes, oh, I want a bookcase, and he goes and makes it, right?
Fantastic.
So he goes. But also I'm aware that that's because I've got stuff, and I hoard stuff, right? So,
so you make it inevitable for him to do that, right? In a way.
The
environment forces.
Yeah, I remember when my girlfriend got the house we're in, and we decided to basically just completely gut it and do it up, and we were going through it, and I was like, don't chuck that piece of wood away, it will come in handy later.
Yeah.
Don't chuck that away, it'll come in handy later. And she was just like, why have we got a pile of wood? Why can't we just go we should just go and buy it. And then I'm like, towards the end of the project, she was like, no, I see now why we're hoarding all of this stuff, because it is expensive, and
it adds up.
It adds up incrementally, adds up, and having it is handy. And anyway, so I just I think it's about having that balance. And I think one of the interesting things that in sort of the scarcity mentality is their ability to get over the fear of trying to do something and create something, because they have to, because they can't afford to go and, you can't afford to go and buy a new machine. You have to be able to fix it. You have to understand how to fix it. You can't just go out and buy, new roof tiles. You have to work out a way, there's so many things that you just have to do because you can't afford it. And I still have that, but I also have the luxury of being able to go and basically, right, well, I want to buy this, I'm going to go and buy it.
I guess
that's the reason why I've got too much Lego.
Fair enough. I guess the only but one of the potential dangers, and I think that's what we also see during the pandemic, is people who take the scarcity a bit too far, and so they become too reliant on themselves, which means that they stopped caring about the people around them, right? They stopped caring about what the government says and that kind of stuff, which is also as negative as for the abundance. I mean, it's like anything, there's like a dichotomy of like both extremes, and you really need to find where the right balance is. And I think so. This is another idea that I've been kind of pondering, especially what you see like in social media or even in media quite commonly, is like, I think the way I summarize it to myself is like this. So everybody is playing a medical doctor. Everybody is giving diagnoses left and right without ever doing any analysis of the treatment, or looking at the symptoms of the patient. Like nobody does the groundwork to see who the patient is, why they need to. And this, like, if you think about like social issues, whether it comes to racism, sexism, gender pay gap, whatever, a lot of people just like, yeah, it's all that, and like, well, how, why? It is just I diagnosed it. It's like, fuck you. Nowadays, that's the way I would say to this kind of person, because that kind of diagnosis throwing is dangerous. For multiple ways.
it's the acceptance of dogma, right? But you've got to remember that, again, I have to remember this, and I am fortunate enough to be working in an industrial sector which prizes critical thought. So everybody I work with on a day-to-day basis is critically challenging the assumptions and the assertions that I make, right? Mm-hmm. Because that is what we're meant to do as scientists.
Sure.
But that is not what you're going to get if you're working in a supermarket.
Sure.
Right? So I have, and you had when you were working for the university, and I suspect in your new role, the constant need to be able to justify the opinions and the knowledge that I have, right? And
not really.
No, but like there's even every scientific fact is wrong, right?
Yes.
And because we're continually trying to disprove it. But if
not,
you're working
not wrong, it's not fully right. I think that's the more correct description.
Right, okay.
Not fully correct.
And we're in an industry that constantly reinforces that. But if you don't have that, it's like, suddenly you lose, you stop, or if you never had that, right? So there's a massive group of people that will never have gone into that and don't go to university and all these not saying that's the only way to get it, but if you don't have that as a ground, then what else do you have? And you have conventional wisdom, you have dogma, you have doctrine, you have trust in the structures and hierarchies of your society, and those can be either those can be wrong, or they can be easily manipulated, or you can be manipulated with it, and so in some ways, when I'm sitting there going, and I have conversations with other people, and I'm just like, well, why do you believe that? I don't understand how you could possibly believe that. And it's because in some ways they are trusting in the system, and the system is potentially not very effective at providing truth.
Sure.
But when you're working in an industry that's constantly challenging you on what you believe, then you get into the habit by default of critically thinking.
Sure. I mean, because I haven't gotten to a lecturer level or SL, like senior lecturer level as you are now. I haven't came across as much of that environment as I would hoped it was at academia. I mean, so I was in university, like from a student till the end, for 11 years. And sure, I mean, as an undergrad, you don't really see that much. I mean, some of it, the kind of critical challenging from some of the lecturers. Doing PhD, I mean, I had fantastic supervisors and people I directly worked with that challenged me, and but not in the sense like, well, why do you think that? But like, there was a constructive discussion that's always happening, so that helped me.
Yeah, the difference between criticism and critical analysis.
Yeah, huge. Yeah, exactly. And then the postdoc, once again, the people I directly worked with, they had definitely blossomed it. But, and there's a huge but that I think it painted the academia in a bit more disappointing manner, but maybe just coincidence in the environments I've ended up being. But more systemically, in academia, in the few universities I've been to, there's a push to exactly move away from that critical challenging of your ideas, of propositions, of opinions, that kind of stuff. And the problem I find the most is that this push is being provided by the false notion about protecting people's feelings. And why I think it's false notion? Because in a scientific method, you have your ideas. They have no emotion behind them. Either legit or not. Can they be tested? Yes, you test them out rigorously until you can break them, right? That's the whole the gist of scientific method. But when you start sacrificing the scientific method because you're gonna break John's feelings, you're compromising the whole system. And what I see more and more and more, at least in the universities I've been to, I'm not saying that this is across the board, but there's been enough of red flags that I started to change position or perspective on the university in what I hoped it would be. Maybe my perspective is also a bit romanticized about exactly that, what you're describing, is that environment that you're being challenged, you need to justify, you need to build a very strong critical basis of the ideas you have, and be happy if somebody destroys your ideas, because that means you're going to come up with better ones, right? As a consequence, and so on. And that environment I haven't seen as much as I wanted to, and exactly a push out the opposite direction. And a perfect example of this was gender pay gap, because it was like my pet project for like a summer, because
I remember you telling me.
And I think this is where especially I was disappointed by the whole system and process, because once again, at the top level, it seems like it's a good thing, it's a good initiative, let's look into this, blah, 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 without ever challenging if any of the assumptions behind this process are legit, right? And I just did a simple goddamn math that is publicly available to everybody, but no longer is, because they now, after me asking for the data for the 4th year, they just deleted all the publicly available information on this topic. And I've done the calculations for the gender pay gap, because Lancaster University, at that point, they claim they have the 3rd worst gender pay gap in academia in United Kingdom. Because when I read this, like, once again, very eye-catching title, I was like, oh my God, where do I work in? How is this discriminative environment, blah, blah, blah. So I crunched the numbers. No, it isn't. I think, if I remember correctly, the numbers are like this. 76% of all the staff at university, based on, like, if you look at the gender, in their pay gaps, in their pay grades, there's no differences in the pay they have. Then for the remaining 21%, so I think there's only 4% left or so, you have up to 5% differences for some reasons, and then you have very small cases, you have some larger disagreements, but they are typically at the very, very highest level, where you have like 5 people working and one of them is a woman type of thing situations, or at the very, very low end of the service industry, and which I have not dove in what's happening there. But so I was like, okay, so the number you're presenting is wrong in every single level, because the number that they've quoted, which I don't remember what it was, I spent like a good hour trying to mathematically and statistically come up with it, and I just couldn't. And so I went to a meeting, which was a gender pay gap task group set up by the university to investigate what are the sources of gender pay gap at the academia, because the assumption is that women are paid less than men. Okay, I'll join the meeting. And I brought up these questions in front of everybody. Like, once again, the room was filled with academics, with, professor level people, with senior lecturer, PhDs, undergrads, that kind of stuff. And I've said, so across the numbers, and it doesn't fucking add up. Nobody had nothing to say. And the only one professor is like, oh yeah, just this is how you things add up. And it's like, no, they don't. I clearly have no fucking idea how to do maths, because just none of this makes sense. And the scariest thing is, like, nobody cared about this. Nobody thought, really, have you done this? Can you show this calculation? I could. Nobody dove into this. And this was like a first level of challenge. Just challenge your initial assumption that you're basing this whole fucking task group on. Is it correct? It is false. And just that simple challenge was met with apathy, with then still diving into arguments of how emotionally like women are being exploited, or financially exploited, because clearly that's not the case. And yeah, it was just appalling. And then to me, the then scariest thing, once again, because a few months passed and then the New Year's gender pay gap report came out. And then after that year, the information for the raw data that was used for the calculations was no longer available. And I've emailed the department asking multiple times, can I receive this data? Nothing. It just completely blocked me out. And that to me just like, okay, we're getting into a very dangerous territory here.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be a bit careful because obviously I still work there.
Sure.
But, generally, academics aren't immune to doing bad science, right?
Sure.
They're just people at the end of the day. I think there's also some other competing challenges, right, that are going on within academia and higher education globally. If you're paying $9,500 in the UK for your education, and somebody's telling you that your ideas are not based in the research that exists there, that that is a big challenge, right? So you've got this real, in some ways, education is a product now. It's not a
which I think is a mistake.
Yeah, I think generally it's a mistake, but it is what it is. It's not what it could be. But we have to deal with that, and we have to understand the pressures. And the pressures are that students are paying $9,500, and we fail them when they don't do very well, and they get very upset because they're just like, well, I've just paid £30,000 for £30,000 for something that I've just failed, and you're like, sure. Yeah. And so there are general issues around what education means, and lots of pressures on higher education institutions to produce employable people, right? Whereas higher education was much more around the pursuit of knowledge, for example.
Sure.
At least highbrow things, and instead it's in some ways it's become the next thing ticking the box that you have to get a good job.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And that changes the nature and the dynamics, and it takes a lot of personal energy as somebody that's teaching, as somebody's teaching in a higher education institution, to kind of stand up and go, no, this isn't right. And that's not the perception, and certainly I see the expectations of some students are very much like, you're just going to give me my degree, and I'm like, no, I'm not. No,
precisely right.
But then these types of things become pervasive. How can it not? Because that's your dominant day in, day out kind of interactions with people, and so it becomes hard to kind of almost like walk the line and do what you think is right. And I certainly try and challenge the students that I work with at postgraduate level to move forward and think critically about their work, and what's the fundamental questions you're working on. And I try and do that at the undergrad and at at postgraduate talk level. But it's hard because you've got to in some way you're one person or a small group of people fighting society and the way that the students are brought up to expect certain things from universities, and that being you spend a lot of time, or I have spent a lot of time basically going, you may have expected this from university, but that is not that's not the reality of coming to university, and a lot of it's to do with the way that universities are portrayed or higher education institutions are portrayed by the media. They're used as potential political footballs. The economic pressures, and that changes the nature of what universities should and shouldn't be doing. But certainly, the research and research cultures are different depending on the disciplines, and depending on the department, and depending on the individuals that are leading them. And I've seen all sorts of different behaviors, as you would expect from a community that's made up of humans.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, all you can do is do what you think is right and based on what you believe in. And I certainly am aware that my view of science has changed over the last sort of 3 decades, starting out in school, coming through university, going through school, doing my basic chemistry experiments, going to university, studying computer science, master's degree, doing a PhD, being a researcher, and then becoming faculty. I've seen all the way through from basic follow these rules through to now you need to start questioning it. Now you're the one that is posing the questions.
Yes.
And it's essential for us. I firmly believe that science and higher education institutions are essential for society to move forward, because in some ways universities are the last bastions of kind of free speech and free thinking.
But even that's being now trying to prohibit, which is another huge red flag as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but it's not. I think the contrast is more stark when you talk about HE, like universities, because it is based on that free thinking kind of mentality. But it's pervasive within society, and it comes back. I think it's pervasive within society because it comes back to the whole. I can go and find people that are just going to confirm what I believe. The human brain is largely designed to adopt confirmation bias, right? That's how we survive. We look for patterns, and then we keep looking for patterns that confirm those, right? Yeah. And it takes a lot of effort to take the scientific approach, which is to have an idea and then spend most of your life disproving it. A good scientist is one that ends his career having disproved his most beloved theory, right?
That's true. I think it's like humanity's greatest blessing and greatest curse at the same time is extrapolation.
Yeah,
because I think comedy is the perfect example. Like, because comedy has a rule of 3, right? You set up, you have a second thing that as if shows you a pattern, and then the third thing you present is completely sweep under the rug, sweep the rug under you, right? Yeah. So that distraction. And thinking about this, that's exactly the case, because it seems like human's mind needs only 2 things to extrapolate the whole fucking thing. And so the third thing, which is, we all know scientifically, you need at least fucking 3 things to know statistically that it's not just full of errors, it's not all of it is error, is already beyond what humans' innate feeling of what is enough to extrapolate there.
Yeah. I mean,
really, it's just simple as that.
Yeah, and I spend a lot of time talking to my students around, it's a great idea, but how you're going to prove it wrong, and in not so not such harsh terms, but how are you going to test this in a way that tests both the that you were right, but also the alternative thinking, right?
Yes.
And in actual fact, I've never given 100% on an essay because by and large, most students don't really do a lot of critical thinking in terms of their essay writing. And by that, I mean looking at all the valid arguments, and some of which are opposed, and then being able to assess the evidence and then drawing an opinion, right? And in some ways, when you've got numbers, that potentially could be easier, but even, there's this, it's a challenge, and it's one that I constantly grapple with. Like, how do I improve my scientific approach? How do I improve my research approach? How am I challenging myself? But again, I recognize I'm in a rarefied profession that is still considered the norm. And I'm not, you wouldn't want a barman to go, are you sure, based on the evidence, you should be drinking that? It's like.
But maybe it is the right thing. That's the thing.
maybe. It's a large number of the roles that we have in society don't reinforce or don't require critical thinking.
Sure.
And as a society, we wouldn't want them to have critical thinking. Because that society would stop operating. So
maybe.
We can't then be surprised.
I assume you know the phrase where it's like, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. It's a Japanese proverb, but I really like it because I think that's the case. It's kind of you'd rather be prepared than unprepared in this situation, right? And I think the same kind of goes with critical thinking. Like, even if the barman, sure, they don't need to challenge anything, but if you have critical thinking skills, it doesn't mean you're always using it. You make the choice to use it or not. That's my point. Yeah,
I agree. But yeah, it needs to be. But equally, society works because there aren't people constantly challenging, constantly critically thinking, and we just need to be. And I just think it is I think it's a necessary part of being armed, particularly in, like, as we said, a modern information society. But it's not necessarily something that as a society we engender for a large number of reasons.
But I mean, it is not evident to me that it is better that is the case. I mean, my argument would always be that we'd rather increase the percentage of society that is able to critically think and assess the situation. And I think even not for like decisions that are high stakes or high value, but even that simple thing about, like I said, a barman asking if you really should have a drink, it's a simple question, but it does require you assessing the situation and saying maybe the man will actually cause more harm with another drink and so on rather than now.
The problem with a critical thinker is that they might think differently to you. And
that's good.
That is one of the challenges that we need to.
I wonder, could you would there be a herd immunity type of thing where enough of society critical thinks that the remainder has to also critical think as a consequence? So maybe you don't need to train everybody.
I think it's the other way. I think it's slightly differently. There's enough. You need to get to a point where there's enough critical thinkers in the society such that the others don't have to. That's the point. That's the point of herd immunity, right? There's enough of you that is immune that the rest of you don't have to be, right?
That's interesting.
So I think, anyway, that's where we're at, I think. But yeah, but again, that's coming from a background that, and a world experience that values critical thinking, and there's equally plausible and functional, groups that doing what you're told is the the prime trait that people value. So it's different societies have different approaches, and lots of different culture clashes. I don't have a solution.
Sure. I guess my perspective is that
if I did, I'd be God.
Yeah, obviously. I guess my perspective is there's a direct correlation between the amount of critical thinking you do and the strength of your character, I think. And because I'm a strong proponent of, to have as strong of an individual as possible, because the positive impact of that is way outweighs any negative impact of that in the society. Then critical thinking is one of those tools that significantly helps you to progress in intellectual learning, in emotional learning, in just strengthening your own character. And thus, then, it seems to me like one of those vital skills that the more people have, and the earlier in life you start training it. Because I was wondering, when you started.
I gotta jump in there. But that's based on where you're at and your situation. And now the slightly defunct Maslow's hierarchy comes into play here. You're in a fortunate position to say that, you've got your base food, you've got all your base needs, and that enables you to then move to the next level, and then to move to the next level. And
See, I would argue the bottom level is the one that needs it the most, because the more critical thinking you have, the more survival probability, the higher survival probability you have.
It's driven. I think you need a driven. The fundamental needs a kind of. Do you need to really critically evaluate where you're gonna, like, the different types you're gonna get food from, or do you just need to get food, right? So
for efficiency of food gathering, yes, you need to do that. I think that's the point. Like, people who are alive at the 5th level, at the bottom, they have innate critical thinking ability. Just a critical thinking ability is not about abstract ideas, but about survival. Otherwise, they'd be dead.
Yeah, I mean, that now we're starting to talk about the semantics of knowledge creation and epistemology and all these types of things. But
Doctor,
one of the things, really, what we're talking about here is a more conscious. When I'm thinking about critical thinking, more conscious process of being able to interpret and understand information and make rational decisions about it. And when we are in a position that we can focus our cognitive effort onto that, but if your cognitive effort has to be focused on survival, then you are less able to create, less able to make conscious decisions. And there's lots of psychology in this, because that's why we do training, right? That's why we have, we do training to get out of buildings. That's why the military train. It's not when you're in a disaster situation, you are not able to think clearly to be able to critically evaluate. You are much more reliant on the muscle memory, the instilled routines to be able to behave. Yes, your brain can try to select the right ones, but that's not really thinking as such. As a non-psychologist, I'm not like going, well, which one of these escape tactics am I going to use? Or this guy's going to, it's not like the Sherlock Holmes movie where he like predicts the person's going to punch him, and it's like, I'm going to step to the left slightly, and if I don't step, that's not how we work. As soon as we're in that kind of emergency kind of situation, and I'm relaying other people's research work here, you default to learned patterns and learned behaviors. And one of the ways you survive disasters is through training, so that your brain has a series of learned responses that it can instantly deploy.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it's not time to learn as you are facing a disaster. But I mean, even under basic survival situation, I think, once again, if you just think about from the survival probability point of view, having a critical mind to whatever degree you have significantly increases your probability of survival rather than not.
But I would probably say having an agile mind, to be able to make effective decisions and adapt. Yes, but what I'm talking about, my frame of reference is having the cognitive luxury that I don't have to worry about where my next meal is, and therefore I can, this is we got almost like the abundance quite a thing we were talking about before. Where we don't have to worry about, our base survival, right? I've got a house, I could get food, I've got transport, I could get pretty much anywhere in the world if I wanted to, push, even now in the pandemic, because I've got enough money to be able to smuggle myself across county lines as if I was in Lithuania. So that I've got a bunch of things that sitting in my hierarchy that gives me the freedom to go, what does this YouTube video mean?
I see what you mean. And so
but we are, we're in a very fortunate socioeconomic position that we have a job that enables us to have the abundance that we can have this conversation, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
there's a vast swathe of people that goes, you've just spent 3 hours chatting about stuff.
Not chatting, conversing, please.
Conversing, yeah. I would have, just to live, I needed to spend those 3 hours working.
Yeah, I get that. I've been there. Jesus Christ. I mean, I know that feeling very, very well. And yeah, at the same time, I do think that. I'm in general. I mean, I think this is a point where probably we would need another 3 hours to dive in. First of all, I understand the semantics that we're actually talking about the same thing, and then see. But I think we're probably talking about the same thing, just from slightly different perspectives and from slightly different angles. At least that's kind of my general impression now.
Yeah, it's just, I can't even remember what our original point was because you was going to the toilet, right? But I think it's interesting. It's like
absolutely.
It's that was it for large part. Well, for some parts of the population, critical thinking is not a necessity, and
but it's useful to have.
It's just treated as. I agree that generally it's a tool set that we want to make sure that we try and instill.
Yes,
right.
I agree.
In the same way that we want to try and instill, if there's a fire, you don't touch it, right? Or if this is how you get out of a building safely, or this is how you swim if you're thrown in a lake, or all these types of emergency procedures. We want it to be less of a, I completely agree. We do want to move. I think to have. To kind of just create a little bit more of not necessarily complete questioning, but just to challenge, particularly in the amount of information and the types of information we're getting and being bombarded with. Yeah,
absolutely.
Especially as we move away from, I think we're quite lucky in the UK still that we have quite tight controls over the media and news reporting. I went to the States really for the first time a couple of years ago, and I was quite shocked in terms of how polarized their mainstream media is. It's
insane.
And the effect of media on perception and in individuals is really, really really important. It's been researched in terms of social amplification of risk, transaction theory, all these types of things. Really shows how the station and the authority of the person telling you the message has an impact. And people on TV have authority, because why else would they be on TV?
Yeah, I mean, you just think about like in Lindy Hop as a teacher in the middle of the room, you already have authority and influence that you have to be wary about.
Not everybody respects the responsibility that carries.
Exactly right.
And or is aware. Not everybody is aware of the responsibility that carries, and I think that's even in some ways, like you creating this podcast and putting it up, it puts you and me in a different position, because we are creating a set of opinions that we're putting out in the world, and we have responsibility for those.
Yes,
and that's different to us having a conversation in a pub somewhere.
That's correct. We're opening ourselves to a much wider scrutiny than we would naturally. But as a scientist, I mean, this is exactly the mode of operation I should be running under.
But it's not. No. So I'm thinking less about it's our scrutiny. We will be under higher scrutiny, but also our conversation is now going to influence others, right? And in a way that we hadn't thought about before. Like if we're if we had this conversation in a pub, then it's just it's just our crazy ideas.
Sure.
But now we're putting it on online for anybody to hear. And so what we're doing is we now have a responsibility for the ideas that we've put into the world.
Sure. I agree.
That can be consumed, and I don't think necessarily everybody has an awareness of that responsibility.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I know what you mean.
Seriously, or even is aware, like I say, is aware that becomes their responsibility when they first start doing these things.
Yeah. I thought quite a lot about this, because technically, like, if this podcast takes even a tiny bit of traction, then I technically become a semi-public figure, right? And that's a whole different perspective and game to play. in life.
Yeah, and I'm conscious of that because of the media stuff that I do as an expert.
Yeah.
I'm conscious of that and how that comes across. So
yeah. Right. Well, we've done over 3 hours, so I think this is probably a
I need
very
to go
good
make
point to
tea.
stop. Yeah. Yeah. And well, thanks, Dan. That was amazing. We didn't actually talk about a lot of things we hoped we'd talk about. So it means plenty of room for next time.
Yeah.
But this was super fun. Thank you. That was a great conversation. Yeah.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Cool. Goodbye.
Bye.